Welcome to our channel, the place where wonder kicks off its boots and knowledge settles in for a cozy chat. Today we're diving headfirst into something that might just flip your entire perspective on reality. It's one of those thoughts that creeps into your mind during quiet moments, when everything around you feels mysteriously connected in ways you can't quite explain. Here's what we're exploring. What if our entire planet isn't just a floating rock, but something genuinely alive? Not alive like your pet or the tree outside your window, but alive in a way that's massive, ancient, and operates on a scale we barely comprehend. The kind of living entity that doesn't need heartbeats or vocal cords, yet somehow possesses awareness. Let's ground ourselves for a second. Right now, as you're listening to this, you're positioned on the surface of an extraordinary world. This isn't some lifeless chunk of matter drifting through the cosmos. It's dynamic, wet, constantly moving. It erupts with volcanic fury and then heals itself. It freezes solid and then melts into flowing rivers. It decays old matter and births new growth. It generates complex weather patterns and nurtures countless forms of life. Actually, it goes beyond nurturing life. It actively creates the precise conditions that allow life to flourish. And it's been orchestrating this incredible dance for billions of years without any instruction manual or outside guidance. Here we sit, you and me, tiny specks on this enormous sphere, wondering whether this whole magnificent system might be far more than just its individual components. We're asking whether we've spent our entire lives walking around on something that actually thinks in ways completely foreign to us. Something that experiences sensations or even dreams on timescales we can't fathom. This concept isn't exactly groundbreaking. Thousands of years before we had satellites monitoring weather patterns or seismographs detecting earthquakes, humans spoke about Earth as if it had personality and intention. In ancient stories and cultural traditions, mountains were described as massive bones, rivers as flowing blood, and vast forests as flowing hair. Our planet wasn't just scenery in these tales, it was a living character with moods and motivations, sometimes portrayed as caring and protective, other times as fierce and unforgiving, but never just a passive backdrop. You could argue this was purely symbolic thinking, humans projecting familiar concepts onto natural phenomena they didn't understand scientifically. That's certainly reasonable. But what if these ancient metaphors contained actual insights? What if when people gave Earth human-like qualities, they were detecting something genuinely real, even though they lacked the scientific vocabulary to describe it properly? Let's pause here because it's tempting to get lost in fantasy when dealing with questions this enormous. We're not suggesting Earth has eyeballs or communicates through wind patterns or maintains a cosmic calendar of daily tasks. What we're investigating is far more nuanced. Could Earth function as an integrated system that operates not just mechanically through physical laws, but with something resembling intention or purpose? And if that's possible, would such behavior qualify as a form of consciousness? We'll tackle those definitions as we go deeper. For now, let's keep our minds flexible and open. Take a moment to observe your immediate surroundings. Every piece of furniture, every wall, every source of light from your device. All of it originated from Earth's materials. The timber, the metals, the electrical energy, even the oxygen filling your lungs right now. Everything supporting your existence has been processed through our planet's systems. We often forget this connection because modern life creates so many layers between us and Earth's raw materials. We inhabit apartments and urban centers filled with synthetic materials, digital networks, and countless gadgets we plug in and power up. Strip all that away, though, and we're still living within the boundaries of an incredibly ancient, incredibly active, incredibly sophisticated system. And this system never stops moving, far beneath where you're sitting, even though you can't detect it. The ground is continuously shifting. Massive tectonic plates drift across molten rock like enormous rafts. Ocean levels rise and fall in patterns that go beyond simple tidal movements. They pulse with long, complex rhythms driven by temperature changes and salt concentrations. Our atmosphere inhales carbon dioxide and exhales powerful storm systems. Clouds gather moisture, precipitation falls, waterways swell, underground reservoirs refill, and halfway around the globe, rainforests absorb this water without needing anyone's approval. None of this happens randomly. These are all components of enormous, interwoven, self-balancing cycles that maintain themselves without any apparent supervision, or at least that's how it appears on the surface. During the 1970s, scientist James Lovelock introduced an idea that raised plenty of skeptical eyebrows while earning some thoughtful consideration. He proposed that Earth functions like one massive self-regulating organism. He named this concept the Gaia hypothesis, taking inspiration from the ancient Greek Earth goddess. Lovelock wasn't claiming our planet is literally a deity. His suggestion was that Earth's system's climate patterns, chemical processes, geological activity, biological networks don't just operate alongside each other. They interact in ways that appear intentional and coordinated. When global temperatures climb too high, certain mechanisms activate to provide cooling. When carbon levels spike, oceans increase their absorption rates. When oxygen concentrations drop, plants and microorganisms make adjustments. It's almost as if Earth monitors its own vital signs and makes gentle corrections whenever something drifts out of optimal range. This was highly controversial thinking then, and honestly it still generates debate today. Most scientists readily accept planetary feedback mechanisms. Those can be measured and documented. But describing Earth as genuinely alive, that proved much harder to accept. Partly because the scientific community was extremely cautious about anything resembling mystical thinking, but also because labeling Earth as living raised profound and uncomfortable questions. If Earth truly is alive, what exactly are we within that life? Are we its offspring, its cellular components, its thought processes, or perhaps something more like microbes dwelling in its respiratory system? These aren't the types of questions science always feels equipped to address, yet they persist because the more we study our planet, the more difficult it becomes to ignore just how thoroughly integrated everything really is. Coral reef systems influence global climate patterns, while volcanic eruptions provide essential soil nutrients. Animal migration routes affect seed dispersal, which shapes forest growth, which impacts rainfall patterns, which determines river flows, creating endless chains of cause and effect. It's not simply that everything connects to everything else. It's that these connections seem to carry memory, display direction, and sometimes even demonstrate clear purpose. Consider this parallel. If you extracted a single cell from your body, perhaps a liver cell, it would be undeniably alive. It performs its designated function, responds to environmental changes, processes energy, but it doesn't think independently. It lacks consciousness. You, however, possess awareness and thought. Why? Because you represent the collective result of countless cells communicating, coordinating, and collaborating to maintain the entire system's operation. What if humans, whales, fungi, forests, wind patterns, and ocean temperatures all serve the same function for Earth that your individual liver cells serve for you? Each component meaningful on its own, yet only gaining full significance as part of something infinitely larger. Don't rush to judge this idea right now. Simply allow it to settle in your thoughts. When we discuss consciousness, we typically stick to extremely limited definitions. We picture something human-like, something that uses words, something capable of declaring, "I exist and I think." Yet even among animals, awareness manifests in countless different ways. Octopi navigate complex puzzles using their tentacles as problem-solving tools. Ravens retain memories of specific human faces across multiple years. Elephants appear to grieve when their companions die. Beyond these examples lie even more subtle forms of awareness. Plants orient themselves toward light sources and respond to physical contact. Fungal networks modify their behavior based on environmental conditions. Bacterial colonies coordinate their activities collectively. Consciousness isn't an on-off switch. It exists along a continuous spectrum. If awareness can function without spoken language, without visual organs, without nervous systems resembling ours, then what prevents it from existing within something as enormous and gradual as an entire planet? This doesn't suggest Earth composes literature or stresses about financial obligations. Perhaps it detects imbalance. Perhaps it possesses some fundamental understanding when conditions shift beyond optimal ranges. Perhaps it attempts corrections not from desire, but from necessity. One fascinating aspect of inhabiting Earth involves how dramatically it responds to our presence. We excavate terrain and land masses subside. We release gases into the atmosphere and storm systems intensify. We clear forests and drought conditions emerge. Sometimes these represent straightforward chemistry and physics. Other times, it genuinely seems like Earth is reacting, not striking back in anger or delivering punishment, just adapting, just reshaping itself in response to inhabitants who've grown somewhat too disruptive. This leads us to a subtle yet persistent consideration. When something responds to stimuli, does that indicate awareness or at minimum sufficient awareness to matter? Think about a thermostat in your home. It doesn't consciously know it's maintaining your comfort, yet it detects temperature fluctuations and works to restore equilibrium. Earth performs similar functions on an incomparably massive scale. It perceives heat changes, accumulates and distributes water, cycles atmospheric gases, redirects solar radiation. It operates through systems layered upon systems. The critical question becomes, are these merely automatic responses, or does something resembling intentional choice factor into the process? We may never know for certain, and perhaps that uncertainty is appropriate. Maybe consciousness operating at planetary dimensions wouldn't register as recognizable awareness. Maybe it would simply appear as consistent stability. Maybe its thoughts manifest as cloud formations. Maybe its emotions express themselves through feedback mechanisms not anthropomorphized, not romanticized, just intricate, enduring, and alive in ways our minds aren't designed to perceive. Remember, humans haven't always understood where thinking occurs. Ancient philosophers located consciousness in the heart or stomach. Centuries of careful observation, anatomical study, and experimentation were required to identify the brain as thought's primary location. Even today, we don't completely comprehend how ideas form or consciousness emerges. So imagine attempting to recognize thinking processes within something spanning an entire planet's dimensions. It's not merely challenging Nietzsche, it might represent an entirely different category of existence. Nevertheless, evidence surrounds us. The coordination between systems, the maintenance of balance, the remarkable timing of events that unfold as responses to environmental changes, and always that quiet sensation that we're not truly isolated, not just because of other animals, microorganisms, or weather phenomena, but because the complete system occasionally behaves as though it's aware of being observed. We'll explore this deeper shortly. For now, simply notice how it feels to sit with this possibility, not to validate or dismiss it, just to consider that perhaps the ground supporting you isn't merely ground. Perhaps it's part of something that processes information, something that pays attention, something that in some vast and indescribable way might actually be listening. So here we find ourselves, venturing further into the question we introduced earlier. Now that we've begun questioning whether Earth might be more than just passive scenery, it's time to take several measured steps backward, not retreating from our exploration, but traveling back through time. Because long before anyone possessed vocabulary for concepts like feedback mechanisms or planetary self-regulation, people had already begun listening, not through sophisticated instruments or computer algorithms, but through stories, ceremonies, and the quiet conviction that the land supporting them was somehow genuinely alive. This wasn't considered fringe thinking. Throughout most early civilizations, the concept that Earth possessed spirit, or actually was spirit, wasn't even debatable. It represented accepted wisdom, a fundamental truth. Earth provided nourishment, protection, seasonal cycles, and weather patterns. It generated new life and reclaimed what died. It moved slowly but never without purpose. For communities whose survival depended entirely on understanding these rhythms, such patterns felt distinctly like personality traits. Notice how frequently Earth appears in ancient belief systems, not simply as location, but as active presence. Numerous indigenous traditions describe Earth as maternal, not symbolically but as actual relationship. The Hopi people of the American Southwest recognize Earth as a living entity, the source of all existence deserving honor and care. In Maori traditions, Papa Tuanuku represents the Earth Mother lying beneath Ranginui, the Sky Father, with their children creating separation to allow light into the world. Within Andean cosmology, Pachamama serves as Earth Goddess, both nurturing and formidable, a being with whom you can exist in harmony or discord. These aren't merely poetic labels for dirt and rocks. They represent distinct roles and identities, carrying responsibilities not just toward the land, but to the land itself. Even the word earth in many languages holds dual meaning, both the soil beneath your feet and the larger entity that encompasses you. It's never just material substance. It's something more ancient, more profound, and somehow conscious. While these beliefs developed differently across the globe, the common thread proves difficult to ignore. Humans didn't perceive themselves as separate from Earth. They understood themselves as integral components, connected through reciprocal relationships. You might argue this represents pure mythology. Indeed, from contemporary perspectives, these stories don't rely on scientific validation, but that doesn't mean they lack observational foundation. Ancient peoples possessed extraordinary sensitivity to their surrounding environment. They understood animal migration routes intimately, tracked plant flowering schedules precisely, and recognized early warning indicators of approaching storms. They monitored the horizon with the consistency of monitoring a pulse, and interpreted stellar movements like reading an accurate timepiece. When they described Earth as living, this wasn't rooted in lack of knowledge. It emerged from profound attention, and careful attention frequently becomes the foundation where scientific discovery begins. Consider this perspective. Long before microscopes existed, people suspected that illness could transfer between individuals. They lacked understanding of bacteria or viral particles, but they observed recurring patterns. They created explanatory narratives for these patterns. Eventually, science advanced and provided those stories with updated terminology. What we currently identify as microbes were previously called spirits. What we now term systems were once named gods. When we learn that ancient civilizations considered mountains sacred, sang ceremonial songs to rivers, or expressed gratitude to soil following harvests, we should ask, what did they perceive that we've stopped noticing? What signals, what transformations, what recurring cycles felt so reliable that they appeared deliberate? In Australia, Aboriginal songlines chart the landscape beyond mere geography. They map it spiritually. These songs transcend simple navigation instructions. They function as living archives documenting land behavior, hidden water sources, and blooming seasons. Each lyrical passage preserves generations of accumulated wisdom about terrain, never viewed as lifeless matter. Walking this land meant moving through an active narrative, and singing it meant sustaining its vitality. In Japan, the kami concept encompasses spirits dwelling within natural features, now stones, trees, waterways. These aren't considered separate from nature. They are nature observed through different perceptual frameworks, treated respectfully, because they're believed to respond genuinely rather than symbolically. Repeatedly across continents and throughout history, we encounter identical patterns. Earth isn't merely utilized, it is engaged with relationally, heard carefully, and interacted with meaningfully. While contemporary science may not embrace the literal interpretation of Earth as spiritual entity, it is gradually rediscovering the sophisticated complexity those ancient stories may have been indicating. For instance, we now understand that forests aren't simply tree collections. They're connected beneath ground level through extensive fungal networks, transmitting nutrients, danger alerts, and chemical communications. When pest attacks threaten one tree, it can warn neighboring trees to prepare defenses. When young shoots grow in shadowed areas, mature trees can nourish them through root systems. Scientists have labeled this system the Wood Wide Web, yet to someone living millennia ago, witnessing plants apparently cooperating, it might have simply appeared that the forest was thinking. Perhaps in some way, it actually was. Weather patterns follow similar principles. When you live intimately connected to land, you notice subtle details: wind shifts preceding storms, bird silence before heat waves arrive, distinctive fragrances that appear when rain approaches. Over time, these patterns integrate into your worldview. They're not random occurrences, mares, they're communications. When signals communicate, something must be transmitting through them. This isn't about superstitious thinking. It's about how careful observation develops into explanatory narratives before science establishes formal frameworks. Sometimes those narratives point toward truths that science only later validates. Examining ancient farming techniques reveals this same layered relationship. Traditional farmers worldwide employed methods maintaining soil health not through external additives, but through crop rotation, field rest periods, and developed instincts. They didn't perceive soil as blank material awaiting manipulation. They understood it as living matter with specific requirements and limitations. These approaches often produced more sustainable harvests than industrial methods, not because they were less sophisticated, but because they remained more synchronized with natural processes. Even ceremonies that might appear purely symbolic often generated practical results. Burning sage for space purification has been demonstrated to reduce airborne bacterial populations. Offerings presented to river deities may have functioned as early water quality monitoring systems. When water changed color or developed unusual odors, this was noted not merely as contamination, but as mood alteration. Earth received treatment as a conscious being because it demonstrated conscious-like behaviors. If this seems unscientific, perhaps we should examine how we define conscious beings. We typically think of life as something that moves, breathes, and consumes resources. This makes sense at human scales, but extending the timeline reveals that mountains also move. Rivers carve pathways, continents shift and collide. Earth does breathe through its own gradual, massive processes via carbon cycles, weather systems, and ecosystem fluctuations. These changes occur so slowly that we only recognize them retrospectively. The concept of Earth as living entity isn't merely cultural nostalgia. It represented a framework that may have helped early societies survive. When you perceive land as sentient, you don't extract resources thoughtlessly. You don't dispose of waste in rivers that can sense your actions. You don't clear forests that are observing. You live with careful consideration, appreciation, sometimes reverence, but always through relationship. This is where things become particularly fascinating. As we confront global environmental changes, modern science begins echoing some of those earlier insights. We employ phrases like Earth system science and planetary boundaries to describe climate, water, soil, and biodiversity interconnections. We discuss resilience, equilibrium, and critical thresholds. The more we investigate, the more we realize these systems aren't linear. They respond sometimes gradually, sometimes abruptly. They function like systems seeking to maintain stability, Socrates systems that notice, not mystically or divinely, but in ways that blur distinctions between mechanical operation and meaningful response. Recently, researchers have begun applying network theory to ecosystem analysis, discovering that certain species function as crucial nodes, critical connection points, in energy and information flow. When these nodes disappear, entire systems struggle. It's not a simple chain, it's an intricate web, and webs are renowned for their responsiveness. A disturbance at one location sends waves throughout the entire structure. Something as minor as insect population changes can ripple outward, affecting climate patterns, agricultural productivity, and water availability. These ripples create feedback loops that don't simply radiate outward, they return as influences. Earth, in other words, isn't merely a platform supporting life. It actively participates in life processes. It's not just our living surface, it's what we live through. And perhaps in some gradual, system-wide manner, it's what lives through us. Moving ahead, we'll examine what scientific research reveals about this concept more thoroughly, not through mythological language, but through empirical evidence, systematic analysis, biological research, feedback mechanisms, and adaptive processes. We'll explore how life originated, how it endures, and what implications arise when life and environment become impossible to separate. For now, keep this in mind. Long before we possessed detailed charts, climate modeling systems, atmospheric computer simulations, we had narratives. Those narratives declared that Earth isn't simply your residence. It represents something you belong to. It perceives, it transforms, it retains memory, not because ancient peoples lacked sophistication, but because they maintained focused awareness. Having explored traditional perspectives on Earth viewpoints that regarded our planet not as passive backdrop, but as active living presence, we arrive at an intriguing crossroads. For centuries, modern scientific thinking distanced itself from such concepts. The Earth, once viewed as parental figure or spiritual entity, was progressively reconceptualized as mere object, mechanical system, collection of quantifiable components. However, not everyone accepted that perspective. During the late 20th century, an idea surfaced that subtly reflected those ancient understandings. This time, though, it arrived supported by empirical data, computational models, and systems analysis. It became known as the Gaia hypothesis. The name itself generated controversy. Gaia derived from Greek mythology, Earth's personification, sounding more artistic than scientific. Nevertheless, the underlying concept addressed genuinely practical questions about planetary function and whether all its elements, atmosphere, hydrosphere, lithosphere, biosphere, might transcend simple puzzle pieces. Could they collectively operate like a singular organism? This hypothesis was initially presented during the 1970s by atmospheric chemist James Lovelock, later developed through collaboration with microbiologist Lynn Margulis. They sought to resolve a straightforward yet profoundly troubling question. Why has Earth's climate remained so remarkably stable across such extended periods? Examining neighboring planets like Mars or Venus reveals extreme environmental conditions. Venus functions as an inferno. Mars exists as frozen wasteland. Yet Earth maintains peculiar consistency, not motionless or unchanging, but dependably hospitable. For more than 3 billion years, despite dramatic solar output variations, asteroid collisions, and massive volcanic events, Earth has remained within the precise parameter range permitting life's existence. This doesn't appear accidental, Lovelock therefore questioned. Could it be that earthly life doesn't merely adapt to environmental conditions, but actively helps sustain them? The proposal wasn't suggesting Earth possessed human-like consciousness. Rather, it proposed that the complete biosphere, the totality of all living organisms, interacts with physical environments in ways that regulate temperature ranges, atmospheric composition, ocean salt concentrations, and additional critical factors. Essentially, life helps generate and preserve life-supporting conditions. This represented revolutionary thinking. Previously, mainstream biological understanding held that life evolved to accommodate existing environments, not vice versa. Lovelock's theory suggested cyclical processes. Life influences environment while environment influences life, together forming self-regulating mechanisms. To illustrate this concept more clearly, he created a metaphor in a theoretical model called Daisy World. Picture a planet resembling Earth, but covered exclusively in black and white daisies. Black varieties absorb thermal energy. White varieties reflect it. As planetary temperature increases, white daisies proliferate, cooling surface conditions. As cooling occurs, black daisies dominate, generating warmth. Without deliberate planning, daisy populations maintain stable planetary temperatures. It demonstrates feedback loops, simple yet functional. Real-world scenarios prove more complex, naturally, but Lovelock identified actual biological feedback mechanisms supporting his hypothesis. Marine algae species release chemical compounds facilitating cloud formation, which reflects solar radiation and cools Earth. Rainforests release water vapor through transpiration, generating precipitation systems that sustain the forests themselves. Growing trees extract carbon dioxide, modifying atmospheric composition. Across longer timescales, rock weathering processes draw atmospheric carbon into soil. These aren't isolated phenomena. They're interconnected, integrated, and collectively appear to establish planetary homeostasis, tendency toward equilibrium maintenance. Initially, the Gaia hypothesis encountered skepticism. Some scientists considered it insufficiently precise. Others felt uncomfortable with its spiritual implications, even when unintended. Early versions of the concept were admittedly more suggestive than rigorous. However, as additional evidence emerged and Earth system science advanced, many fundamental principles gained acceptance. What shifted wasn't necessarily the supporting evidence, though more became available, but the conceptual framework. Scientists adopted different terminology. Rather than describing Earth as behaving like living organisms, they discussed coupled systems, feedback dynamics, resilience factors, and nonlinear interactions. These Gaia concepts were refined into planetary regulation models. At its core, though, the fundamental question persisted. Does the biosphere represent merely component collection, or does it function as a unified system maintaining itself? Currently, Numerous Gaia hypothesis aspects are considered foundational within Earth system science. It's widely accepted that life influences climate patterns and vice versa. What remains debated is how extensively that influence operates, and whether it suggests coordination or mere coincidence. Some argue that apparent regulation simply results from evolutionary processes. Species benefiting from environmental stabilization survive longer periods. Their accumulated actions create balance appearances, no intention, no awareness, just natural selection. Others remain uncertain because observable feedback loops aren't consistently localized. They span entire continents and ocean basins, involving organisms completely unaware of each other's existence. How does such complexity emerge from individual behaviors? This introduces the concept of emergence. Emergence occurs when simple components generate complex outcomes. Individual ants lack intelligence. Colonies behave intelligently. Single neurons don't think, mice brains do. Perhaps earthly life operates similarly. Perhaps no individual organism attempts planetary stabilization, yet their combined activities produce that result, not through planning but through participation in larger patterns. And this pattern represents a form of awareness, not involving thoughts or language, but involving maintenance, persistence, and continuation. Consider a human body. It operates numerous systems maintaining survival, immune defenses, thermal regulation, nutritional distribution. These mechanisms don't require awareness of being part of a complete organism to fulfill their functions. They simply perform. The outcome is wellness, stability, and recognition when problems arise, even though that recognition doesn't involve verbal communication. What might this appear like on planetary dimensions? Perhaps rainforests that instinctively understand optimal seeding timing. Perhaps coral reef systems that develop where oceanic currents undergo shifts. Perhaps Earth doesn't possess a centralized brain, yet perhaps none is required. Perhaps interconnected networks suffice. This introduces conflict in our consciousness conceptualization. We typically associate awareness with centralization. Minds control headquarters, unified perspectives. However, natural systems don't always function this way. Slime molds navigate complex mazes without neural networks. Bird flocks shift directions without designated leaders. Even human brains function less like command centers and more like ongoing dialogues between competing subsystems. If consciousness can exist in distributed, decentralized, emergent forms, why couldn't it operate at planetary levels? This doesn't suggest Earth possesses intentions, but perhaps it demonstrates inclinations. Perhaps it gravitates toward life because living systems maintain its stability. Perhaps it self-corrects when mechanisms become excessive. Perhaps what we've labeled nature's balance resembles something closer to nature's instinct. If accurate, the Gaia hypothesis transcends elegant theorizing. It represents quiet homecoming, not returning to mythology, but returning to interconnection, recognizing that Earth isn't merely where life occurs, but how life occurs. Living entities don't simply survive within established parameters. They help establish those parameters. Naturally, like any intricate system, Earth can be strained beyond capacity. Feedback mechanisms can malfunction. Critical thresholds can be exceeded. When this happens, the system doesn't resist mouths, it transforms. Equilibrium shifts. Conditions become less hospitable to life, not from hostility, simply from mathematical necessity. Here the Gaia concept exceeds theoretical speculation. It becomes cautionary message. If our planet operates as a system tending toward equilibrium, then that equilibrium depends on life's contributions. What occurs when life begins disrupting that system faster than adaptation allows? Climate transformation is often described through parts per million measurements and sea level rise degrees. It can also be understood as Earth's regulatory mechanisms struggling to respond. Warmer oceans absorb reduced carbon quantities. Melting ice reflects diminished sunlight. Desiccating forests lose their rainfall pattern functions. Feedback loops persist, but they're rotating counterproductively. Unlike gradual historical changes, these are occurring rapidly. In geological terms, we've activated acceleration, and the planet is adjusting mesed, not for self-preservation, but for rebalancing. The question remains, Will that new equilibrium still accommodate us? Gaia, if we may still employ that terminology, lacks sentimentality. It doesn't favor particular species. It doesn't reward intelligence or technological advancement. It rewards integration, the capacity to participate in systems without destroying them. This may represent the most disturbing realization of all, because if Earth operates like an organism, it may also possess something resembling an immune system, not literal white blood cells, but imbalance responses. Heat waves, droughts, flooding, and wildfires may not constitute punishments. They may be symptoms not of rage but of regulation. In that context, humanity might need to reconsider its position, not as controllers or caretakers, but as components of a body capable of damaging it, capable of healing it, yet never separate from it. The Gaia hypothesis, whether interpreted literally or not, encourages perceptual transformation, away from ownership toward belonging, away from domination toward participation. Because whether Earth possesses consciousness or not, it demonstrates responsiveness. It adjusts, adapts, and persists. Perhaps we should follow suit. The concept of Earth as self-regulating system leads us towards something even more concrete. If you remain still, merely still, you might detect something remarkable about your surrounding environment, not supernaturally, not through mystical visions or ethereal whispers, but through rhythmic patterns, gradual, profound, frequently imperceptible rhythms. They operate continuously. Some scientists, researchers, and inquisitive observers have started questioning whether these rhythms constitute more than mere coincidence. Could they indicate something resembling planetary pulse? The term pulse carries significance. We associate it with vitality. Living entities possess rhythmic beats. Hearts, certainly, but also breathing patterns, activity cycles, rest periods, appetite fluctuations. Pulses suggest regulation needs internal timing mechanisms. They represent patterns indicating something is active, responsive, self-maintaining. If Earth demonstrates rhythms, actual measurable ones, what functions are they performing? What are they monitoring? Begin with fundamentals. We already understand planetary rotation, one complete spin every 24 hours, plus or minus several milliseconds. It's consistent, reliable, ancient, yet it transcends mere movement. Its cyclical process governing everything, from photosynthetic reactions to animal behaviors to chemical timing within our own cellular structures. Circadian rhythms, as they're termed, don't exclusively affect humans. They appear in avian species, insects, bacteria, even fungal organisms. Everything inhabiting Earth has somehow synchronized with planetary rotation. Then there's orbital movement. Do one complete solar circuit every 365.25 days. Another fundamental rhythm. It determines seasonal patterns, migration routes, reproductive cycles, weather formation, trees develop buds, flowers produce blooms, animals relocate. These aren't arbitrary reactions, they're calibrated responses. Earth's spatial position transmits signals through light variations, temperature changes, and gravitational forces, while life responds accordingly. These cycles are readily observable. We've constructed calendars around them. However, they're not exclusive. Oceans maintain independent timing systems. Tidal movements rise and fall, not just daily, but through longer, more subtle cycles connected to lunar orbit and solar positioning. There are fortnightly spring and neap tides, monthly lunar phases, and even 18.6-year nodal cycles influencing weather and wave behaviors. Coastal ecosystems respond to these fluctuations. Marine species spawn during specific lunar phases. Crab populations migrate according to lunar cycles. Coral organisms with remarkable precision simultaneously release reproductive cells as though synchronized with some submerged timekeeper. Below surface waters, additional patterns emerge. Ocean currents transport thermal energy across the planet through massive circulation highways. The Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, for example, carries warm tropical waters northward while drawing cold waters southward in a conveyor system, influencing weather across multiple continents. This mechanism also pulses mis-decelerating, accelerating, modifying based on salt concentrations, temperature variations, and wind forces. It doesn't merely react to climate conditions, it actively helps create them. Within Pacific depths operates the El Niño Southern Oscillation, a warming and cooling pattern affecting oceanic temperatures that redistributes global precipitation, drought conditions, and storm systems. It maintains irregular rhythm spanning 2 to 7 years, not mechanical precision, yet not complete disorder either. Something within oceanic systems retains memory, something triggers resets. Earth's atmospheric layers contribute to this symphony. Pressure formations rise and decline in recognizable patterns. The Madden-Julian Oscillation delivers rainfall across tropical regions every 30 to 60 days. The Quasi-Biennial Oscillation reverses stratospheric wind directions every 28 months. Polar vortex systems pulse with seasonal changes, expanding and contracting like stressed respiratory organs. Nothing here occurs randomly. Nothing follows simple mechanics, yet everything repeats in cycles. How should we interpret this phenomenon? Dozens, potentially hundreds of intersecting cycles, each maintaining distinct rhythms too gradual to hear, too enormous to sense directly. Together, though, they determine the world we inhabit. If this doesn't constitute a pulse, what alternative explanation exists? Certainly, some argue that labeling these rhythms as pulse represents mere metaphor morse, that we're imposing biological frameworks onto systems operating purely through physical laws. This perspective contains validity. Tidal movements result from gravitational forces. Seasonal variations occur due to axial inclination. No heartbeat mechanisms required. However, here's the crucial point. These explanations don't diminish the rhythm's reality. They enhance their fascination. They demonstrate that Earth isn't simply reacting to external influences, it's integrating them systematically. Consider the Schumann resonance phenomenon. It consists of electromagnetic wave sets circling the globe, trapped between Earth's surface and ionospheric layers. Lightning activity generates these waves which bounce around planetary surfaces, creating standing wave formations. The lowest frequency, approximately 7.83 Hz, has been nicknamed Earth's heartbeat by some observers. While not official scientific terminology, the comparison persists not merely because it's rhythmic, but because it's constant, global, and somehow soothing. Researchers are investigating correlations between these frequencies and human brainwave patterns. Results remain preliminary and mechanisms unclear, but curiosity continues. Are we detecting planetary signals? Are we more synchronized with environmental conditions than we recognize? Electromagnetic fields aren't the only consideration. Even seismic activity follows discernible patterns. Earthquakes often appear unpredictable, and largely remain so. Yet tectonic plates don't shift randomly. They glide, impact, and subduct through cycles accumulating stress across decades or centuries. Volcanic systems pulse as well, not in seconds or minutes, but through extended, patient releases. Mount Etna has erupted intermittently across millennia, like excessively deep breathing. Yellowstone breathes through its caldera's rising and falling movements. Not mythology, not metaphor, measurable phenomena. Earth expands and contracts as gravitational influences from lunar and solar bodies stretch its crust incrementally. These Earth tides are minimal beer, just several centimeters in most locations, yet remain consistent. They influence groundwater levels, magma pressure, and small tremor frequencies. In many ways, the planet moves like a sleeping chest, subtle, gradual, but never motionless. Then there's carbon cycling. The carbon cycle doesn't merely describe carbon movement through atmospheric, terrestrial, oceanic, and biological systems. It also maintains rhythm. Plants absorb carbon during growth periods, releasing reduced quantities into the atmosphere. During autumn and winter seasons, decomposition returns carbon to air. Satellite technology can track this pulsing. Can seize absorption during northern hemisphere summers, increased release during northern winters. Planetary exhalation followed by inhalation, alternating steadily and vitally. Some scientists have proposed viewing Earth's biosphere as a metabolic system. It consumes solar energy, processes it through photosynthetic reactions, distributes it via food networks, and releases waste as thermal energy and decomposition byproducts. It adjusts when energy inputs change, It decelerates during winter months. It accelerates during spring periods. If this doesn't resemble metabolism, it certainly appears metabolic. What significance do these observations carry? Perhaps nothing independently. Cycles don't equate to consciousness. Pulses don't demonstrate purpose. Yet they suggest something frequently overlooked. Earth isn't motionless. It's not static. It's not passive. It's dynamic, complex, and extraordinarily responsive. When systems demonstrate such responsiveness, when they react, adapt, and restore equilibrium, it's natural questioning whether they're also somehow aware. Not aware as humans experience awareness, not through thoughts, emotions, or language, but aware as well-functioning bodies recognize imbalance, not through deliberate thinking, but through automatic responding. If your body temperature elevates, you perspire. If you experience hunger, your body transmits signals. If you sustain injury, cellular repair mechanisms activate. None require conscious thought, yet all carry meaning. They sustain life. Perhaps planetary systems function similarly, not through intentions, but through processes, not through awareness, but through actions. Naturally, risks exist in extending this analogy excessively. Earth isn't human. It doesn't desire, wish, or decide. However, that doesn't reduce it to mere scenery either. These rhythms, cycles, and pulses suggest something transcending chaos, something exceeding randomness. They indicate Earth behaves like systems seeking persistence, and persistent systems adapt. We observe this currently facing climate transformation. The planet is changing, rhythms are shifting. Pulses are accelerating in some regions, decelerating in others. Forest systems are absorbing reduced carbon quantities. Permafrost is releasing increased amounts. Ocean temperatures are rising, weakening their thermal storage capacity. Glacial ice disappears more rapidly. Weather systems develop with increased velocity. The cyclical patterns persist, yet the rhythm grows increasingly erratic. This deserves careful observation. Not because Earth harbors anger, seeks revenge, or possesses measurable consciousness, but because a stable planet maintaining steady rhythm represents life's fundamental requirement. Perhaps the genuine revelation here isn't determining whether Earth lives, but recognizing whether we've been paying attention. The indicators exist. The rhythmic patterns exist. They're delicate, understated, gradual, yet undeniably real. Perhaps by tuning in, by learning to sense the underlying beat beneath our feet, we might begin comprehending not only Earth's rhythms, but our position within them. The deeper you explore planetary rhythms, the more challenging it becomes separating life from its supporting systems. Atmosphere, hydrosphere, pedosphere, none truly lack vitality. They interact with biological processes in ways transcending mere enablement. They're influenced by biology, maintained by it, even revolutionized by it. Nowhere is this more apparent than within forest and oceanic systems. These aren't simply environments hosting life, they're transformation engines. They absorb, release, modify, and circulate. In numerous ways, they represent Earth's respiratory and circulatory centers. When people describe forests as planetary lungs, they typically reference how trees and vegetation absorb carbon dioxide while releasing oxygen through photosynthetic processes. This is accurate naturally, but represents only a fraction of actual occurrences. Forests don't merely generate oxygen but modify weather patterns. They control temperature ranges. They impact precipitation systems thousands of kilometers distant. These are extensive network systems influencing atmospheric chemistry and physics, not just regionally, but globally. Examine the Amazon rainforest. It's frequently characterized as a carbon sink, locations where carbon dioxide gets absorbed and sequestered, helping regulate climatic conditions. However, that's incomplete. The Amazon also creates its own precipitation. Trees release water vapor through transpiration, adding moisture to atmospheric conditions. This moisture generates cloud formations producing rainfall that nourishes the trees. It's a self-perpetuating cycle, a biological feedback mechanism. Its influence extends beyond the Amazon basin. Water vapor from these forests travels via air currents, affecting weather throughout South America. Even precipitation patterns, as distant as the United States and Africa, can be influenced by Amazonian health. This pattern isn't exceptional. It is influence exceptional. Forests worldwide fulfill similar functions. In temperate zones, boreal forests help cool the planet by storing carbon in soil systems and influencing albedo (MEO), the quantity of solar radiation reflected by Earth's surface. In tropical regions, dense canopies maintain humidity levels, stabilize soil structures, and cycle nutrients with remarkable efficiency. These forests don't simply exist within climate systems, they co-create them. Then there's forest communication methods. This isn't speculative fiction. We now understand that trees connect through subterranean fungal networks, enabling resource sharing and signal transmission. When pest attacks threaten one tree, it can emit chemical warnings prompting neighboring trees to strengthen their defenses. Mature trees, sometimes termed mother trees, can distribute nutrients to younger specimens. These aren't metaphorical concepts, they're documented phenomena. Forests genuinely possess memory, responsiveness, and organization. If forests represent Earth's respiration, then oceans constitute its circulation system, covering more than 70% of planetary surface area. Oceans absorb thermal energy, carbon, and oxygen, redistribute them, and return them to atmospheric systems in modified forms. They store more carbon than atmospheric and terrestrial systems combined. They transport enormous energy quantities from equatorial regions toward polar areas. They influence cloud formation, storm trajectories, and agricultural success. Like forests, they don't operate randomly, they function cyclically. Consider the biological pump mechanism. This process enables oceans to extract carbon dioxide from atmospheric conditions, convert it into organic compounds through photosynthesis in microscopic plankton, and transport it into deep sea environments. When these organisms expire, this carbon can remain sequestered for centuries. Without this pumping system, atmospheric carbon concentrations would be substantially higher. Climate conditions would differ dramatically. Terrestrial life might face far greater instability. Plankton organisms, so minute they're invisible to naked eyes, perform nearly half of all Earth's photosynthesis. They nourish fish populations, support whale species, and determine atmospheric chemical composition. Yet they depend on oceanic current movements, temperature variations, and nutrient upwelling for survival. They're vulnerable. When oceanic conditions shift, they respond immediately. Then there's Thermohaline Circulation's boat, the ocean's great conveyor system. Driven by temperature and salinity differences, it transports water across entire basins, carrying warm tropical waters to northern latitudes, while returning cold water to deeper levels. This circulation maintains regions like Western Europe at much warmer temperatures than their latitude would indicate. It's part of a larger planetary scale system helping stabilize global climate patterns. However, it can also shift. When it does, it triggers changes reverberating through ecosystems, weather systems, and agricultural regions. Some paleoclimate evidence suggests major disruptions in this circulation have coincided with rapid climate events throughout Earth's history. Today, as ice melts and salinity changes, there are indications that portions of this conveyor system may be weakening, not from intention, but because the system is adapting to new conditions. Oceans also generate aerosol particle, microscopic droplets, entering atmospheric systems and facilitating cloud formation. They reflect solar radiation, influence precipitation, and shape planetary energy balance. These aerosols don't originate from industrial sources or pollution. They come from plankton, marine life, sea spray. They're components of vast invisible exchanges between oceanic and atmospheric systems. This exchange isn't merely chemical, it's chemistry influenced by life. Even sound transmission differs in oceanic environments. Whales and dolphins navigate, using echolocation mist their vocalizations bouncing off underwater canyon walls. Coral reef systems pulse with clicking shrimp and bubbling fish sounds. Storms rumble through water like distant percussion. Deep below, tectonic activity transmits gradual waves rippling through crustal layers. It's not merely oceanic movement, there's oceanic communication, not through verbal language, but through signal transmission. The more we investigate these systems, the more we discover they don't simply sustain life, they demonstrate lifelike behaviors. They modify themselves, responding to environmental triggers. They restore stability following disturbances. They preserve internal conditions within specific parameters. This represents homeostasis's fundamental definition. Homeostasis is among the characteristics we associate with living systems. None of this suggests oceans or forests possess consciousness, yet it confirms they're dynamic, active, vital, and responsive to transformation. Not all systems demonstrate such responsiveness, but living ones almost invariably do. This responsiveness generates questions because currently, facing global environmental stress, we're witnessing these systems begin shifting. The Amazon, previously functioning as carbon sink, now releases more carbon in certain regions than it captures due to deforestation and temperature increases. Coral reef systems are experiencing bleaching and mortality as oceanic temperatures climb, diminishing biodiversity and undermining the biological pump mechanism. Phytoplankton populations are relocating, altering food web foundations. The Great Conveyor System below experiences disruptions and feedback mechanisms are intensifying. These transformations aren't merely statistical data, they're symptoms, indicators that something no longer maintains equilibrium. However, here's the easily overlooked aspect. When forests and oceans begin shifting, the planet doesn't simply disintegrate, it reorganizes. It attempts establishing new balance, species adapt, current systems realign, fresh patterns emerge, ecosystems migrate, systems reform. It's not always elegant. There's destruction, extinction, collapse. Yet there's also reconfiguration. The system doesn't immediately fail, interpays, it adapts. The question becomes, can it adapt sufficiently quickly? Because historically, these shifts occurred across centuries, sometimes millennia. Currently, we're pressuring these systems at velocities they weren't designed to manage. When feedback loops fracture, the system doesn't simply recover and mirror. It can transition to new states with dramatically different conditions. Hotter, more chaotic, less predictable. Still functional perhaps, but not necessarily habitable, as we've known. That's the genuine risk. Not Earth's death, but its transformation, where respiration becomes irregular, where circulation falters, and where conditions we depend upon yield to something unfamiliar. Not because the planet fails, but because it persists. We rarely consider this. We assume surrounding systems remain stable because they've always existed. Yet forest respiration and oceanic circulation aren't permanent. They're maintained. Not through design, but through equilibrium. Equilibrium can be disrupted. This doesn't render us powerless. Actually understanding these systems, their operations, their responses provides us with agency. We can cease interrupting their rhythms. We can learn supporting their cycles rather than overwhelming them. We can function not as outsiders, but as participants, cells within the system. Because if Earth lives in any meaningful way, then we comprise part of its life. Not exceptional, not separate, but included. This transforms the question from "is Earth alive?" to "how do we live well within something that already exists?" It makes sense now, shifting our attention downward, beyond canopy and weather, beyond oceanic and atmospheric sounds and signals, into the Earth itself. Not dismissively, but literally. Because if you're wondering how a planet might perceive itself, coordinate all components without centralized control, you eventually arrive here, alive here, in soil, or more precisely, in what inhabits it. It's simple, overlooking ground level. For most people, it's merely something we traverse, construct upon, cultivate, excavate through. We perceive it as background of useful, certainly, fertile, hopefully, but mostly inert, a location where things develop, not something that develops itself. Yet that's illusion based on familiar scales. Soil isn't just material, miss it. It's process. For recent decades, researchers have been discovering something transforming our understanding of ecosystems, communication, even intelligence. They've found something resembling a network, a gradual, quiet, invisible network of signals, responses, and coordination, not just between individual organisms, but between entire species. Not just species, but complete ecosystems. It's called the mycorrhizal network, and in some ways it functions like nervous systems. The term derives from Greek words for fungus, myco and root, rhuza, Mycorrhizal fungi are microscopic filaments developing in and around plant root systems. They establish symbiotic relationships, mutually beneficial partnerships. Plants provide sugars generated through photosynthesis. Fungi reciprocally help plants absorb water and nutrients from soil. That's the fundamental exchange, ongoing for over 400 million years. What makes this transcend simple cooperation examples is what occurs at scale. These fungi don't just connect to single plants, they connect to many dozens, hundreds. The complete forests can be interconnected through singular fungal networks, creating underground web systems. Through these, trees can exchange carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus. They can transmit signals, even warnings. Some studies demonstrate that when pest attacks threaten one tree, it can send chemical alerts through the network, encouraging neighboring trees to activate defensive mechanisms. Others have discovered that mature trees, sometimes called mother trees, share nutrients with younger saplings, especially those in shadowed or distressed conditions. The network doesn't just transfer resources, it appears to direct them. This raises questions. How are these decisions made? How does the system determine resource distribution? Does some form of memory participate? Coordination mechanisms? The fungi themselves lack brains. Trees don't possess nerve systems, yet somehow the system behaves like distributed intelligence. Suzanne Simard, a forest ecologist who helped pioneer this research, has characterized it as communication network. She and colleagues have mapped these connections, demonstrating how signals can travel from one forest area to another, not instantaneously, but reliably. The signals aren't random, they change based on context. They carry information. If this doesn't resemble nervous system function, what does? In animals, nerve systems transmit electrical signals. They transmit discomfort, satisfaction, awareness of equilibrium, thermal variations. Yet the essential function isn't velocity, it's synchronization. Nervous systems help different body regions maintain coordination, respond to environmental conditions, preserve stability. Soil, as it happens, performs similar functions. Volcano receives information, moisture levels, temperature fluctuations, root systems, microbial activity, chemical compounds. It processes these inputs, it redistributes them, it reacts accordingly. All this occurs without centralized control. It's not a brain, yet it functions like brain-adjacent systems, decentralized, enduring, constantly adapting. This extends beyond tree networks. Soil hosts enormous quantities of microbial life forms, bacteria, fungi, archaea, nematodes. A single teaspoon contains billions of individual organisms representing thousands of species. They create networks as well. Some collaborate, others compete. They generate chemical compounds affecting plant development, disease immunity, even animal temperament. Some scientists now reference soil microbiomes similarly to how we discuss human gut microbiomes, as essential systems influencing everything from wellness to behavioral patterns, like digestive systems. Soil can be damaged. Agricultural chemicals, compression, erosion don't merely eliminate nutrients, they destroy networks. They diminish complexity. When complexity decreases, resilience follows. The system becomes less responsive, less adaptable, more vulnerable. This matters because healthy soil transcends agricultural concerns. It involves carbon sequestration, water purification, and nutrient cycling, supporting all terrestrial existence. When soil operates effectively, ecosystems remain stable. When it doesn't, consequences spread outward into forest systems, waterways, atmospheric conditions. Some researchers have started investigating whether these subterranean networks respond to external stress in ways exceeding individual organism capabilities. For instance, if forests experience drought conditions, can fungal networks help relocate water where most needed? Does the system retain information about previous conditions? Does it develop optimal response strategies? These remain open inquiries. Answers depend on how we define intelligence, memory, responsiveness. Yet patterns exist resembling systems we typically associate with awareness. Consider the implications. Beneath our feet may exist something like planetary web systems, not merely stationary, but expansive, connecting species, transmitting signals, redistributing energy. It doesn't exactly think, yet it adapts, it balances, it responds to damage, recovers. This suggests another consideration. If forests, fungi, and soil microbes interconnect, forming something resembling unified systems, what occurs when we interfere without understanding our impact? Deforestation, for example, doesn't simply eliminate trees, it removes network nodes, it severs connections. In certain areas, this has caused soil fertility decline, reduced water retention, diminished biodiversity, not solely from vegetation loss, but from structural disruption. The underlying framework enabling ecosystem function disappears, and restoration isn't as straightforward as planting replacement trees. Networks require time, cooperation, memory. Perhaps Earth doesn't need nervous systems like ours. Perhaps it already possesses one mind not rapid, not centralized, but profound, ancient, and omnipresent. When we traverse forests, we don't observe this network. We see tree trunks, branches, foliage. Underneath, though, in darkness, dampness, gradual movement occurs, not measured in meters per second, but adaptations per year. Signals transfer, responses happen, feedback adjusts. This isn't metaphorical language, it's empirical measurement. Laboratory research, field studies, peer-reviewed investigations, data pointing toward reality. We're only beginning to appreciate that planetary self-maintenance capacity doesn't reside in singular organs. It exists in systems spanning the entirety. Viewed this way, questioning whether Earth lives appears less speculative, not because it behaves human-like, but because it functions like living systems with circulation, metabolism, feedback, repair, and perhaps even something resembling sensation. It's natural lifting our perspective again, looking upward into atmospheric layers, the realm we breathe, where weather originates, where temperature and pressure boundaries interact, shaping what we experience as climate. Among the most dramatic expressions of that system are storm formations. We typically conceptualize storms as events, occurrences mired as hurricanes approach, thunderstorms develop, tornadoes form. We discuss them like accidents or intrusions. Yet storms aren't merely outbursts. They result from complex interactions. In some cases, their behavior demonstrates such intricacy, such precisely calibrated conditions, that it suggests unusual possibilities. Do storms behave like systems pursuing objectives? Not consciously, not as animals might seek food or shelter, but functionally, because observing storm formations, strength accumulation, how they draw from multiple sources then shut down when sources disappear, it can appear more than simple reaction. It can resemble strategy. Consider hurricanes, also termed tropical cyclones depending on location. They require highly specific formation conditions, warm ocean water, typically above 26.5 degrees Celsius, pre-existing weather disturbances, moist air, minimal vertical wind shear. Missing any component prevents storm development. When ingredients align, though, the system begins self-construction. Air rises from warm ocean surfaces, carrying moisture upward. As air cools, moisture condenses, releasing thermal energy. That energy fuels additional rising air, drawing more air from below, creating wind patterns. Earth's rotation provides the system's spiral through Coriolis effects. It's not singular gusts or one-time lifting. It's self-sustaining loops. Heat feeds motion. Motion draws fuel. Fuel builds intensity. The storm organizes itself. This process continues for days. Storms don't simply form and proceed, they adjust to environmental conditions. If wind shear increases, they weaken. Passing over cooler water slows them. Hitting land cuts their energy source, causing structural collapse. It lacks life, yet it functions as though it understands environmental conditions, as though it comprehends persistent strategies. Some researchers have characterized hurricanes as thermal engines. They transport energy from warm oceanic surfaces to upper atmospheric levels, redistributing heat globally. In this context, they fulfill planetary functions. They don't merely generate devastation, they also provide regulation, accomplishing this through turbulent processes. Turbulence, remarkably, can demonstrate extraordinary precision. Researchers revealed that hurricane eyes, nearly calm centers surrounded by chaos, exhibit incredible structural organization. Woven patterns circulate in concentrated bands, temperature differences remain sharp, and symmetry occasionally proves remarkable. It represents systems constantly self-correcting, responding to disequilibrium, maintaining coherence while advancing destructively. This self-correction capacity, this ability to stabilize around central cause, typically characterizes intelligent systems. While storms lack thought processes, they do optimize themselves. Similar principles apply at different scales with thunderstorm development. They emerge when warm, humid air ascends rapidly, often along frontal boundaries where contrasting air masses converge. Rising air cools, condenses, releases energy, driving continued upward movement. This generates cumulonimbus clouds, massive towering formations, reaching stratospheric heights. Within these cloud structures, something remarkable occurs. Water droplets, ice crystals, and air currents collide precisely enough to separate electrical charges. Cloud tops become positively charged while bottoms develop negative charges. When voltage differences grow sufficiently large, charges release as lightning. Yet systems don't discharge once and stop minus. They accumulate, reset, and fire repeatedly. There's rhythmic quality, energy pulses, tension moments, releases, all occurring within non-static system boundaries. They expand, relocate, adapt. Some storms become supercells, rotating thunderstorm systems, persisting for hours while producing tornadoes. These cellular structures maintain delicate equilibrium between inflow and outflow, updraft and downdraft dynamics. They can endure across enormous distances, preserving structural integrity despite shifting terrain and air current variations. Observing one from distance reveals more than cloud formations. You witness behavior. You see something assembling, maintaining form, reacting to obstacles, extracting energy where available. Again, no consciousness exists, yet there's unsettling resemblance to purposeful action. Why does this significance matter? Because it indicates Earth's atmosphere isn't merely weather's backdrop, its responsive system. Within that system, storms function like emergent phenomena, patterns arising from countless minute interactions, yet developing independent existence. This emergent concept appears throughout nature. Individual birds don't plan flight paths, yet collectively they create formations. School fish change directions without leaders. Storms, driven by temperature, pressure, moisture variables, organize themselves into patterns that act, persist, and sometimes evolve. It's noteworthy that our storm formation models remain imperfect. Despite satellites, radar systems, and supercomputers, storm behavior aspects remain unpredictable. Why certain storms intensify rapidly, for instance, or why some generate tornadoes while others don't, we can calculate probabilities, but systems themselves contain surprises, feedback loops, subtle variations, thresholds that once exceeded transform everything. This unpredictability contributes to storms feeling alive, not comfortingly, but as animals seem familiar yet unpredictable, responsive yet untamed. When humans construct systems merge machines, software, organizations, we prize adaptability. We design for feedback mechanisms, course corrections, resilience. When these systems respond to changes, we label them smart. When they anticipate changes, we call them intelligent. Yet here are weather systems constructed by physics, fueled by thermal energy, shaped by rotation, that accomplish all this without deliberate design. They respond, alter trajectories, adjust to inputs, not achieving goals, but sustaining motion. Some scientists have investigated storms as examples of dissipative structures, systems maintaining organization by consuming energy and expelling entropy. Essentially, they preserve order by processing chaos. This isn't metaphorical language, it's thermodynamic principle applying to living systems too. Metabolism operates identically. From this perspective, boundaries between living and non-living blur. What defines life? Structure, self-maintenance, energy flow, reproduction. Storms don't reproduce, yet they form, stabilize, regulate, and dissolve in ways resembling life cycles. They lack purpose, yet demonstrate persistence. This leads to the peculiar realization, perhaps it's not that storms live or think, but that they're components of systems doing something remarkably similar to both. Earth's atmosphere isn't simply containment mine, it's medium through which energy moves, transforms, reorganizes. Storms represent one method of accomplishing this. They're not accidents, they're tension expressions, imbalance seeking resolution. During this process, they determine destinations not through choice, but through conditions. Yet outcomes appear similar. Motion shaped by information, structure shaped by response. This doesn't make storms less hazardous. If anything, it makes them more sobering, because if storms represent planetary self-regulation methods, if they're not merely side effects but system-level responses, then disrupting systems means disrupting patterns. That's what we're beginning to witness. Warmer oceans, increased atmospheric moisture, more system energy, storms forming more rapidly, moving more slowly, delivering more precipitation, covering greater areas. Storms surprising even models designed to anticipate them. Feedback mechanisms remain active. Functions still operate, but inputs have changed. Consequently, outputs are transforming too. This pattern will recur in water systems, ice formations, carbon cycles, fire behavior. Earth systems don't just operate, they respond. When they respond, they don't always return to baseline conditions. Sometimes they establish new ones. After tracking storm movements and atmospheric tensions, it helps returning to something appearing much more stationary initially. Mountains don't fluctuate with seasonal changes. They don't inhale and exhale like woodland systems. They don't flow and circulate like marine environments. Yet that apparent motionlessness misleads. It's not vacancy, it's preservation. Mountains contain chronicles, not through symbols or written records, but within their fundamental architecture. In this manner, they function as planetary memory banks, enormous, gradual, and extraordinarily comprehensive. We typically associate memory with brain functions, neural activity, stored experiences, retrieved patterns. However, memory manifests in numerous forms. Tree rings preserve seasonal imprints. Glacial ice encapsulates ancient atmospheric conditions. Mountains, through their configuration, composition, and stratification, maintain archives spanning not years, but hundreds of millions of years. When properly interpreted, they reveal narratives not merely of occurrences, but of Earth's responses. Begin with sedimentary deposits, rock strata accumulating over time, layer upon layer. Some result from river systems depositing fine particles transported from distant locations. Others originate from prehistoric oceans, once covering areas we now consider landlocked. Each stratum contains evidence, mineral compositions, fossilized remains, particle dimensions, chemical markers. Arid periods create different signatures than humid ones. Volcanic ash indicates eruption events. Charcoal deposits suggest ancient fire activity. These aren't randomly scattered remnants. This systematic documentation, geologists term this stratigraphy, representing one primary method for studying Earth's history. Yet layers don't simply accumulate, they also bend, fracture, and incline. Tectonic pressures muddy Earth, pushing, pulling, sliding, curve strata into arcs and undulations, or compress them into sharp summits. Observing mountain ranges with angled rock formations reveals more than geology. You're witnessing history compressed and reformulated. You're seeing events predating humanity, documented not in ink, but in stone. Some records demonstrate breathtaking magnitude. The Himalayas, for instance, result from the Indian subcontinent's collision with Asia. This collision commenced tens of millions of years ago, and continues presently. As plates pressure each other, crustal material elevates while simultaneously trapping rocks once located at oceanic floors. Marine fossils discovered at high mountain elevations demonstrate that current world's tallest ranges were previously submerged. Mountains retain oceanic memory. North America's Appalachian Mountains are even more ancient, formed hundreds of millions of years ago during the supercontinent Pangaea's assembly. Erosion has affected them over time, yet their foundations persist, Within those foundations, we discover evidence of Earth's earliest tectonic activities. The memory there transcends longevity. It's foundational. It represents continental formation memory. Then there are volcanic mountains, peaks, that don't merely remember history, but actively influence future developments. Volcanic strata can document eruption and dormancy cycles. Some eruptions produce pumice and ash deposits. Others create thick lava flows cooling into basalt formations. These materials' chemistry reveals Earth's mantle composition across different periods. Geysers trapped within volcanic rock provide ancient atmospheric clues. In Iceland, Hawaii, and along the Pacific Ring of Fire, volcanoes function as outlets for planetary internal processes. They release pressure, redistribute materials, transform landscapes, and thereby inscribe new geological layers. They remember not through storage, but through transformation. Even mountain range configurations carry information. Sharp peaks indicate youth, most recent elevation, minimal erosion. Rounded hills suggest maturity. Extended exposure to wind, precipitation, freeze-thaw cycles. Glacially carved valleys reveal ice that once covered extensive land areas. Scars remain visible like wrinkles across Earth's surface. Beyond rock formations, ice also becomes part of mountain memory. Glaciers trap air bubbles during formation. Those bubbles contain greenhouse gas, traces, mears, carbon dioxide, methane from distant eras. When scientists extract ice cores from mountain glaciers, they can interpret climate data extending back hundreds of thousands of years, temperature records, precipitation patterns, atmospheric chemistry, mears, all preserved, frozen, silent, awaiting interpretation. What's extraordinary is that these records aren't merely passive. They don't simply exist motionlessly. They influence subsequent developments. Mountain configurations affect wind movement, precipitation distribution, river flow patterns. Those rivers transport sediment, creating new strata elsewhere. Snowpack determines water supplies for downstream ecosystems. Mountain memory shapes valley futures. This influence types gradual, indirect, persistent, easily escapes notice. It doesn't announce itself, yet proves essential. Mountains help regulate climate patterns. High elevations reflect increased sunlight. No coverage cools air temperatures. Alpine ecosystems respond rapidly to temperature variations. They function like early warning mechanisms, alerting us to broader system shifts. Currently, many such systems are transforming. Glaciers are receding, permafrost is melting, rock faces once stabilized are beginning to shift, triggering avalanches. Mountains continue remembering, but change velocities are accelerating. In some instances, memory is being eliminated. Mining operations, deforestation, construction projects don't simply modify mountain surfaces, they remove layers, disturb strata, obscure records. When records become obscured, we lose capacity to understand not merely what occurred, but how Earth previously adapted. We lose reference standards. We lose perspective. This represents one peculiar consequence of inhabiting a planet possessing memory. We can learn from it, yet we can also damage it, not just environmentally, but historically. Earth willingly shares its knowledge, but only when evidence remains intact. It's worth contemplating this concept. Mountains, by nature, demonstrate durability. They outlast civilizations, outlast species, yet that durability conceals vulnerability not within rock itself, but within documentation, arrangement, layering, subtle patterns. These prove easily disrupted. Once disturbed, they don't restore. When we consider Earth as something potentially alive, or at minimum something transcending inert matter, it helps including memory possibilities, not rapid memory, not intentional memory, but something resembling accumulation, something resembling structure, history influencing present conditions, not through thought, but through form. We observe this in biological systems too. Scars represent memory types, bone density changes, responding to stress patterns. Defense systems evolve, responding to dangers. Or physical forms retain information even without our conscious direction. Perhaps our planet functions similarly. Perhaps mountain ranges represent components of memory storage mechanisms, not centralized, but distributed across terrains. across epochs. It's not that mountains possess thought, but they contain knowledge of occurrences, not through language, but through mass, configuration, and stratification. Extending the concept that mountains retain memory and that our planet might preserve its chronicle in forms transcending verbal communication, we encounter a question that's subtler yet equally peculiar. If Earth possessed awareness somehow, how might it communicate? Would we even recognize how to perceive such communication? Language, as we employ it, serves as meaning transmission tool. It's organized, symbolic, typically vocal, yet that's not communication's only form. The natural realm overflows with messages, signals transmitted between system components, not through vocabulary, but via chemical processes, physical movement, frequency variations, and temporal patterns. When we examine these interactions closely, we discover that earthly life continuously converses, simply not through methods we were educated to acknowledge. Vegetation, for instance, lacks mouths or auditory organs, yet responds to contact, illumination, temperature fluctuations, gravitational forces. They orient towards solar radiation, they fold foliage when touched, they emit chemical alerts when damaged. Sometimes, when insects bite leaves, plants release volatile compounds drifting airborne. Neighboring vegetation detects these compounds and activates defensive chemistry. It's not random noise, it's systematic signaling. This atmospheric messaging transcends individual species. Some plants alert others, some attract beneficial predators, Meptus tiny wasps, for example, that hunt the insects consuming them. It's indirect yet intentional. Distressed plants don't vocalize, they emit chemical warnings. Beneath surface levels, signaling persists. Root systems release chemical compounds into soil environments, influencing surrounding microbial communities. Different plant species can identify genetic relatives and modify root development accordingly. Some prevent competition, others pursue cooperation, all occurring wordlessly. Fungal organisms, as previously discussed, establish extensive soil networks connecting plant root systems. Through these networks, nutrients and information transfer. While communication content isn't always apparent, changes in one system area trigger responses elsewhere. Information flows merely as that's fundamental to any language system. Animals naturally employ numerous communication methods. Birds vocalize, whales produce calls, bees perform dances. Beyond obvious examples, though, additional layers exist. Bats utilize echolocation. Elephants communicate through low-frequency sounds traveling underground across kilometers. Certain fish species change coloration, signaling mating readiness or predator warnings. Octopi pulse and ripple skin patterns, not merely for camouflage but conveying intentions. Each signal adapts to environmental conditions, requiring receivers capable of interpretation. That creates language-like characteristics. Not just expression, but expression intended for comprehension. Here's where it becomes more intriguing. Many signals aren't deliberately generated in human terms. They're evolutionary responses, automatic, reflexive, refined over time. Yet they function effectively. They still transmit information. This raises questions about how much natural communication occurs without conscious intent. Consider your own physiology. Your cells communicate constantly. Hormones transport messages through circulatory systems. Neurons fire across synaptic gaps. Your immune system coordinates responses against invaders. You don't consciously direct these processes, yet they continue operating. Systems function through signaling, and signaling generates responses, no vocabulary required. If Earth represents a comprehensive system minus an interconnected network of interacting components, it follows that communication might occur at scales we don't perceive, not centralized, not conscious as we experience consciousness, but present nonetheless. Examine atmospheric conditions. Ocean temperature variations cause air pressure shifts, influencing jet stream patterns that guide storm systems. Information moves not through grammatical structure, but through causation chains. Systems react, components influence other components. Behaviors spread throughout networks. Consider fire ecology. In certain ecosystems, fire isn't merely threatening but communicative. Specific plants germinate only following burns. Heat triggers growth responses. Smoke stimulates flowering processes. Across generations, species have adapted not just to fire itself, but to fire timing and renewal rhythms. They listen in their manner for appropriate conditions and signals. Even microscopic organisms communicate. Soak, quorum sensing represents bacterial processes for detecting others' presence through chemical signal release and detection. When populations reach certain densities, groups modify behaviors, becoming more aggressive, more cooperative, or relocating. It's fundamental consensus formation, not through voting, but molecular interaction. Similar signaling appears in coral reef systems. Coral polyps communicate with internal algae, sustaining relationships supporting entire reefs. When conditions become stressful due to thermal increases or contamination, relationships deteriorate. Corals expel algae, causing bleaching meatish and essentially communication breakdown. When occurring broadly, complete systems begin failing. Much of what sustains us depends on these subtle chemical languages. Pheromone releases, wavelength modifications, movement patterns. They're not metaphorical concepts. They're functional mechanisms that can be interrupted. Pollution, noise interference, artificial illumination can overwhelm or confuse signals, maintaining ecosystem stability. This matters because communication, broadly defined, enables systems to self-regulate, maintain equilibrium, and prevent collapse. When signaling ceases, feedback mechanisms deteriorate. When feedback fails, systems lose adaptive capacity. Imagine conversation in crowded environments. Clear signals produce rapid, relevant responses. Excessive noise makes conversation incomprehensible. Miscommunication increases until coordination ultimately fails. Throughout the biosphere, we're observing phenological shifts, biological event timing changes disrupting interactions. Flowers bloom prematurely while pollinating insects arrive delayed. Birds migrate seeking food that's disappeared. Signals continue transmission, but they're desynchronized. When rhythms lose alignment, systems falter. None of this is unprecedented in nature. Ecosystems have always adapted to changes. However, pace matters critically. Gradual change allows communication evolution alongside environmental shifts. Rapid change creates signal confusion without system learning time. Therefore, when we discuss Earth as potentially conscious man, it's not mystically, but systematically, we're addressing precisely this: components' capacity to interact, transmit signals, and coordinate activities. This distinguishes organisms from mere cellular aggregations. This separates societies from simple human collections. Earth as entirety may lack singular voice, yet overflows with messaging systems, communications flowing from roots to atmosphere, from oceans to cloud formations, networks relaying information, responses shaping life's conditions. If this isn't language, it's certainly analogous, serving identical functions. It reminds us that communication predates vocabulary. It originates with responsiveness. Earth responds perpetually across dimensions, across mediums, across temporal scales. We now direct attention skyward, not merely toward clouds or weather movements, but the atmosphere itself, not romanticized versions, but physical reality. Atmospheric layers extending hundreds of kilometers upward, surrounding a rotating planet, containing particles, currents, electromagnetic fields, radiation, and illumination. It's tempting viewing it as voidos, space we traverse, barrier separating ground from stars, yet it transcends that. The atmosphere demonstrates activity, organization, reactivity, and despite apparent enormity, maintains vigilant awareness. It observes not consciously as we do, but through continuous adjustments, reflecting, refracting, absorbing, regulating incoming and outgoing energy. This occurs in ways affecting every terrestrial life form. Consider solar radiation. Each second, Earth receives bombardment from solar energy molecules of light, ultraviolet, infrared, and beyond. Most proves harmless, some essential, some hazardous. The atmosphere doesn't block everything, but filters selectively. The ozone layer, positioned high in stratospheric regions, absorbs most harmful ultraviolet radiation. Without this protection, surface conditions would prove hostile to most life forms. This protective layer wasn't always present. It developed gradually, influenced by living organisms, specifically photosynthetic life forms, releasing atmospheric oxygen. That oxygen eventually produced ozone, essentially life-generated conditions protecting life, feedback loops, atmospheric responses to biology. This feedback persists. Cloud formations reflect sunlight spaceward, cooling surfaces. Greenhouse gases retain heat, warming them. Volcanic particles or dust storms can brighten or dim skies, altering energy balance. The atmosphere isn't passive, mediates energy flow. It receives information from terrestrial surfaces, oceans, forests, and responds through temperature, pressure, humidity, and wind modifications. These responses aren't uniform. Atmospheric behavior differs over glacial ice versus desert terrain. Patterns shift based on vegetation, oceanic temperatures, surface reflectivity variations. It's not unidirectional mine-me, it's conversational. Signals ascend, conditions descend. Received signals aren't exclusively natural anymore. Human activities now emit enormous quantities of aerosols: soot, methane, carbon dioxide, water vapor. These particles interact with sunlight and cloud formation processes. They modify air chemistry. They influence precipitation, timing, and location. They even alter sunset coloration. The atmosphere records these changes not through memory as we understand it, but via measurable transformations. Satellite data demonstrates this clearly. Thermal mapping, spectral shifts, reflectivity alterations, contamination zones, even minor land use changes. Forest clearing, wetland drainage, urban construction transmit atmospheric signals. These signals don't vanish, they propagate. They influence jet streams, monsoon systems, drought patterns. The system maintains awareness. Beyond light and thermal energy exists additional complexity. Earth's magnetic field, generated by its spinning molten core, extends outward, interacting with solar wind-charged particle streams from the sun. This interaction creates the magnetosphere, deflecting most harmful solar radiation while generating auroras near polar regions, dancing lights in upper atmospheric layers, caused by particles colliding with oxygen and nitrogen molecules. These displays prove beautiful yet functional, human real-time system adjustments, regulating extraterrestrial energy, maintaining equilibrium. Even lightning serves purposes. Beyond storm functions, it helps sustain atmospheric electrical balance. Daily, thousands of strikes discharge accumulated static, transferring charge between sky and ground. Research suggests lightning may assist nitrogen fixation into plant-usable forms, indirectly nourishing the biosphere meaningfully. The atmosphere monitors chemically too. High-altitude sensors detect atmospheric compositional shifts, corresponding not only with major events like volcanic eruptions or wildfire activity, but with soil microbial activity changes, deforestation rates, even seasonal plant growth cycles. Life's exhalations reach the atmosphere, which adjusts responsively. Indicators we're only beginning to comprehend emerge. Gravity waves ripple through atmospheric layers, following massive disturbances. Temperature inversions trap pollutants in valleys. Clouds form at precise altitudes and droplet sizes to reflect or absorb thermal energy. These transcend mere weather patterns, their information carriers providing real-time responses to real-time changes. Some researchers characterize the atmosphere as thin, dynamic membrane regulating planetary energy. It spans merely dozens of kilometers, less than intercity distances, yet encompasses nearly everything that breathes, flies, precipitates, or combusts. Within this narrow layer, Earth maintains habitable conditions. From this perspective, the atmosphere isn't passive space endear, it's equilibrium maintenance. Every gas molecule, every water droplet, every wind current contributes to ongoing measurement processes. Inputs receive constant evaluation: thermal energy, moisture, pressure, chemistry. Outputs generate continuously: cloud formations, storm systems, jet streams, calm periods. When inputs change faster than system adaptation allows, the atmosphere responds accordingly. It doesn't restore previous conditions. It adapts to current realities. Such adaptation can prove gentle or violent: extended droughts, unexpected hail, prolonged, slower hurricanes, unfamiliar weather patterns. not because atmospheric systems fail, but because they're recalibrating to modified condition sets. This proves crucial because we frequently regard the atmosphere as a disconnected entity. We discharge waste into it, harvest from it, depend upon it, without recognizing it as a responsive system, yet it does respond. The more we comprehend its functions, the clearer it becomes. The atmosphere isn't vacant space it's active participant, detection system, control mechanism. You might say it observes items not as optical organs observe, but as sensor networks monitor transformations, as thermostatic devices detect temperature variations, as systems engineered for equilibrium, maintenance recognize disruption. In this context, the atmosphere represents one of our planet's most reactive systems. It's first to alter when conditions shift. It's first to signal when critical limits are exceeded. It's first to provide feedback through temperature changes, atmospheric disturbance, or stillness. It doesn't vocalize, yet it communicates. We've gradually learned interpretation methods: weather balloons, radar systems, satellite technology, LiDAR, chemical detection equipment, all instruments we've developed to decode atmospheric messages, not merely weather predictions, but insights into Earth's systemic conditions. Because when atmospheric conditions change, something more comprehensive changes too. If all these mechanisms, oceanic, forest, soil, storm, even atmospheric systems, respond to alterations, regulate themselves, and interact across enormous scales, what precisely distinguishes this planet from something we'd classify as living? And if it's alive meaningfully, is it conscious? Consciousness proves complex terminology, carries numerous assumptions. Most people conceptualize it through human frameworks, awareness, cognition, identity, memory, yet in biological and neuroscientific contexts, consciousness doesn't always require self-reflection. Sometimes it simply means capacity to integrate information and respond coherently to changing environments, something that perceives then acts accordingly. Under that expanded definition, planetary consciousness concept feels less peculiar, particularly when examining how we define consciousness in other animals. Humans aren't exclusively aware species. Elephants demonstrate self-recognition in mirrors. Octopi solve complex problems and exhibit individual personality traits. Birds demonstrate future planning capabilities. Some primates mourn deceased companions. Even insects show learning patterns and preferences. The deeper we investigate, the more difficult establishing clear conscious/non-conscious boundaries becomes. In neuroscience, no universally accepted consciousness location exists. We understand it involves networks, electrical activity circuits throughout brains that illuminate, synchronize, desynchronize, repeat. Yet more important than individual neurons is their connection patterns, interaction configurations, signal integration into unified states representing organisms' experiences. This understanding has generated theories like integrated information theory, IIT, suggesting consciousness emerges from system interconnectedness levels, not merely component quantities, but interaction complexity. How extensively one component influences the entirety, and how effectively systems can distinguish between different states. Under this framework, consciousness represents gradients, not binary conditions, more like spectrums. Systems with more intricate, highly integrated information would demonstrate higher consciousness degrees. Systems with simpler architectures would show less. This returns us to Earth, because stepping back and observing it not as component collections but as unified systems, it's difficult ignoring its genuine complexity and integration. Every biome influences others. Every system provides feedback. Changes in one domain ripple into adjacent ones. Nothing remains truly isolated. Oceanic systems influence atmospheric conditions, which influence forest systems, which influence soil systems, which loop back into climate patterns. When scientists model these systems, they frequently discover tipping points, critical thresholds, where minor changes trigger large-scale shifts. To prevent these shifts, the planet maintains buffers, forests cooling air temperatures, wetlands absorbing excess precipitation, ice caps reflecting solar radiation, each component adjusting to stabilize others. This transcends equilibrium this active balancing. Biology terms this homeostasis, organism capacity to maintain stable internal conditions despite external changes. Your body performs this continuously. You perspire when overheated. You shiver when cold. Blood sugar, peace levels, heart rate, this everything adjusts constantly without conscious direction. It simply occurs. Earth demonstrates homeostatic signs too, not perfectly, not instantaneously, but responsively. When carbon dioxide increases, oceans absorb more. When temperatures rise, cloud patterns shift. When ecosystems suffer damage, others adapt. Sometimes responses become overwhelmed, yet attempts persist. This regulation type raises questions. Does it require consciousness? Not necessarily. Thermostats can regulate room temperatures without awareness. However, when regulation occurs across dozens of interconnected systems, each influencing others, dismissing comparisons becomes more challenging. Not because Earth possesses brains, but because it behaves like systems that understand self-maintenance. Here's where planetary consciousness concepts enter discussions. Not consciousness as thoughts or emotions, but consciousness as responsiveness, as presence, as systems, transcending component summation. This concept has appeared in various forms throughout history. Ancient civilizations often viewed Earth as living entities. Gaia to Greeks, Pachamama to Andean cultures, not metaphorically, but literally, beings that nourish, breathe, suffer, heal. Modern science departed from such ideas, favoring mechanical explanations over meaningful ones. Yet now, in certain sectors, it's returning, not through mysticism, but observation. The Gaia hypothesis, proposed by James Lovelock and Lynn Margulies during the 1970s, suggested that biosphere and physical environments form complex self-regulating systems maintaining life-favorable conditions. Initially controversial, too speculative, too anthropomorphic, yet gradually aspects gained acceptance, especially as planetary-scale feedback loop evidence accumulated. Critics note that regulation doesn't imply intention. Planets aren't choosing habitability maintenance. It happens that life has evolved supporting life-necessary conditions. Even if accurate, it still describes systems that act, react, and adapt globally, which resembles conscious behavior in some ways. Perhaps Earth isn't conscious personally. It doesn't experience dreams or make deliberate choices, yet perhaps it possesses consciousness in systematic ways, self-aware, through feedback mechanisms, reacting to internal and external forces, developing across time. Perhaps consciousness needn't resemble ours to exist authentically. There's also temporal considerations. For awareness functions on rapid timescales, proteus seconds, minutes, days. We evaluate awareness through response velocity. But what if consciousness could operate slowly? What if it emerged across decades, centuries, millennia? Would we even recognize it? If Earth possesses awareness forms, it might not be detectable in real time. It might manifest as extended adaptation patterns, gradual equilibrium pulses, expansion and contraction cycles, intelligence without haste. This isn't theory with testable predictions, at least currently, yet it represents perspective shift regarding our planetary relationship, not as inhabitants on stone, but as contributors within vast ongoing systems responding to themselves. Some researchers have started investigating planetary intelligence concepts, not as metaphysical beliefs, but as scientific frameworks. They question what it would mean for planets to process information across scales, store, transmit, and integrate that information, develop feedback systems, optimizing long-term stability, not through conscious planning, but emergent results. Following that reasoning, humans might not represent Earth's mind. We might constitute one component of larger processes, miss part of sensing, memory, disruption, adaptation, sometimes supporting systems, sometimes damaging them, yet never external to them. This generates final questions not about Earth, but about us. If Earth demonstrates consciousness somehow, or even simple responsiveness, what's our systematic role? Are we signals? Are we interference? Are we protective mechanisms? Are we pathogens? Do we enhance planetary awareness or distort it? Clear answers may not exist, yet perhaps better questions are, what would change if we acted as though the planet were conscious? not from certainty, but respect. Because if something observes, responds, retains memory, and adapts, it might not matter whether it's aware by our standards, it might still deserve treatment as something that is. We focus now, not abandoning the broader perspective, but examining smallest and most familiar components, the lives we typically notice, those resembling us, or dramatically different. Those with vision, with motion, with choices, mammals, microorganisms, and the extensive meaning chain connecting them. Superficially, these categories appear unrelated. One is microscopic, largely invisible, the other warm-blooded, large, mobile, yet both fulfill roles within Earth's broader life patterns, extending far beyond their size or complexity. Both participate in something greater than themselves, systems that influence, regulate, and sometimes define planetary conditions. Begin with microorganisms. By pure quantity, they dominate. In every oceanic droplet, every soil portion within our bodies at volcanic edges, deep within crustal layers, microbes endure mice not as passive travelers, but as planetary function drivers. The oxygen we inhale was initially generated by photosynthetic bacteria. Soil nitrogen gets fixed by microbial communities. Matter decomposition, nutrient cycling, food fermentation, immune system defense, none would function without them. We associate intelligence with nervous systems, yet microbes communicate chemically, adapt rapidly, respond to dangers, and evolve at remarkable rates. In colonies, they function collectively. In biofilms, they create protective barriers. Some can remain dormant for decades, awakening when conditions improve. Some directly exchange genes, lateral information sharing resembling learning in many aspects. Planetarily, their impacts prove foundational. Ocean microbes, specifically phytoplankton, perform nearly half of Earth's photosynthesis. They establish marine food web foundations. They influence climate through carbon sequestration and cloud seeding compound production. When their populations shift, weather patterns follow. Soil microbes interact with plant roots, not merely helping nutrient absorption, but protecting against pathogens. These networks, invisible to observation, form silent economies beneath every forest, every agricultural area. They determine what flourishes and what doesn't. All occurs without our recognition. These organisms don't announce themselves, yet their influence pervades everything. They represent, essentially, the biosphere's nervous system and metabolism. Mammals, contrastingly, are ones we recognize not just because we're mammals ourselves, but because they exhibit behaviors mirroring our own. They nurture offspring. They establish social connections. They explore, migrate, adapt. From grieving elephants to singing whales to tool-using primates, mammals demonstrate awareness not merely of environments, but of each other. They're not exclusively complex behavior animals, yet we focus on them because of their eyes, expressions, vocalizations. We empathize. We attribute meaning to their actions. Doing so reveals something about ourselves. We seek meaning through similarity. But what if meaning isn't limited to resemblance? What if it's embedded within relationships? Because mammals also shape environments. They modify landscapes through grazing, burrowing, construction. They distribute seeds, control populations, support ecosystems. Beavers dam waterways, creating wetlands. Wolves regulate prey behavior, indirectly affecting forest growth. Bats pollinate vegetation and control insect populations. Humans, uniquely disruptive, reshape entire planets. We often discuss humans as nature separate, yet from systems perspectives, we're participants, not external observers. Our choices affect identical feedback and regulation loops as any other species. We consume energy resources, modify atmospheric chemistry, transform surface reflectivity. We redirect waterways, extract minerals, cultivate vegetation, construct urban centers. We represent force myths, not through superiority over Earth, but through integration within it. Like microorganisms and fellow mammals, we function in patterns. Our civilizations develop. Our technologies reproduce. Our understanding disseminates horizontally. In numerous ways, our species' behavior resembles biological processes across different scales, not symbolically, but architecturally. The question emerges, what does this behavior signify? What's the importance of all this activity, these multi-scale interactions? Biological meaning isn't always purposeful. It is frequently functional. What function does something serve? What influence does it generate? From this perspective, microbes provide meaning to mortality by decomposing death into usable materials. Mammals provide meaning to mobility by spreading life across territories. Humans, at our finest, potentially provide meaning to consciousness itself. Because we're not merely reactive, Maicha, we observe, we contemplate, we construct mental system models, we envision possibilities, we measure, simulate, and occasionally, though not consistently, modify based on those simulations. We're potentially the first species capable of consciously responding to planetary feedback, deciding what kind of influence we wish to represent. Yet that awareness proves double-edged. It enables problem solving. It also enables ignorance. We can detect atmospheric warming, reef mortality, forest collapse, yet still remain inactive. No other species demonstrates this. No other species must. Therefore, meaning becomes our choice, extending not just to our values but our systematic self-perception. Are we hierarchical peaks or network nodes? Are we Earth's future architects or balanced stewards? Are we feedback immune or feedback shaped? This isn't moral questioning baits. It's practical, because every living entity participates in cycles exceeding itself. Microbes decompose mammalian remains. The mammals transport microbial constructions. Together, they sustain systems maintaining planetary habitability. We exist at these systems' intersection, capable of observing both scale extremes, capable of influencing both. Our ability usage may determine cycle continuation as we've known them. Meaning needn't be abstract, it can be grounded in structure, behavior, continuity. In that context, planetary meaning, if existing, is found in life's persistence, in adaptation, response, and renewal capacity. Every organism, from smallest bacteria to largest whales, contributes to that persistence. We're part of that contribution too, we always have been. It becomes increasingly difficult separating what lives from what simply endures. How there's one particular system seeming furthest from life, the slowest, most indifferent continental motion, plate shifting, gradual cracking, folding, and crustal reshaping across hundreds of millions of years. It feels geological. It feels beyond awareness questions. Yet examining closely, plate tectonic behavior suggests something more minus not thought, not purpose, but something resembling deep responsiveness, something like memory, something like dreaming. Plate tectonics involves large lithospheric slab movement, rigid outer shell floating atop softer, hotter mantle. The crust isn't unbroken. Surface near it's fragmented into plates, some oceanic, some continental, and they move minimally just centimeters yearly. Over time, though, they redraw planetary maps. These motions aren't random mind, they're driven by Earth's interior processes, mantle convection currents, sinking slab pull, radioactive decay, heat, surface effects prove profound, mountains ascend, oceans expand or close, continents separate and later reunite, volcanoes erupt, earthquakes propagate, all occurs in gradual looping cycles. This created the Himalayas as India pressed into Asia. This opened the Atlantic as Europe and North America separated. This forms subduction zones, creating trenches and island arcs. Over time, land becomes ocean, seabed becomes peaks, the planet inverts itself. Is simple viewing this mechanically more slow planetary churning, yet patterns emerge across the last billion years. Supercontinents have assembled and fragmented repeatedly. Rodinia, Pannotia, Gondwana, Pangaea, each followed by isolation periods, climate shifts, and biodiversity bursts. Pangaea's breakup, for example, created isolated environments allowing separate species evolution. That motion helped shape today's life. Diversity. In this context, plate tectonics isn't merely background processing, it's its possibility shaping. Its gradual shifts rearrange ecosystems, modify ocean currents, influence global temperatures. Volcanic eruptions release carbon dioxide. Mountain ranges alter wind patterns. Plate boundaries mark zones of extreme geological and biological richness. These shifts demonstrate rhythm, not clockwork precision, but loose cycling, assembly and dispersal patterns, collision and retreat. It's not always smooth. Plates stick then slip. Earthquakes release pressure. Magma rises then settles. Yet over time, planetary surfaces reconfigure themselves in recurring themes. Some scientists study these cycles not as historical curiosities, but as essential to Earth's habitability. Plate tectonics helps regulate carbon cycling. Volcanic eruptions release CO2. Rock weathering absorbs it. Subduction carries carbon-rich sediments into the mantle where processes restart. Without this cycling, greenhouse gases would accumulate unchecked or vanish entirely. Climate would drift from balance. Unlike most known planets, Earth has maintained this cycling for billions of years. Mars once had tectonic activity, but it ceased. Venus shows resurfacing signs, but not plate tectonics as we understand it. Earth remains apparently unique. Some researchers argue plate tectonics functions as planetary thermostat, not perfectly, not rapidly, but across extended time frames, helping maintain temperatures allowing liquid water and life persistence. Its feedback system, not for days or years, but epochs. If accurate, it raises familiar questions. What kind of system behaves this way? One with regulation, one with feedback, one that adapts. This doesn't mean the planet lives biologically. Tectonic plates aren't cellular structures. Geological faults lack cognitive abilities, yet the complete system preserves life-supporting conditions and reacts to disruption. Perhaps not intentionally, but efficiently. Then there's the symbolic aspect, not merely literal mechanisms, but their implications. Plate tectonics operates extraordinarily slowly. Its transformations remain largely imperceptible across human lifespans, yet it never ceases. Urban centers rise and decline on shifting plates. Mountain chains grow millimeters annually. Ocean trenches deepen gradually. Islands drift slowly. The entire planetary surface quietly reorganizes beneath our feet, beginning to resemble something recognizable. Not motion we can observe directly, but movement we can track. Movement revealing itself retrospectively, like dreaming, gradual, symbolic, influenced by forces we don't completely comprehend until long afterward. In dreams, our minds replay, restructure, resolve experiences. They process what we've encountered, sometimes chaotically, sometimes meaningfully. While content may appear disordered, dreaming serves purpose. System maintenance, balancing memory, emotion, learning. Plate tectonic's planetary function isn't dramatically different. It restructures surfaces. It equilibrates pressure. It releases energy. It buries and resurrects matter. It transforms stress into architecture. Just as dreams affect waking existence, tectonic activity influences everything above, just not immediately, not directly, but consistently. Continental configurations affect precipitation patterns. Ocean depths influence thermal circulation. Even Earth's axis, its tilt, its seasonal cycles can be affected by surface mass distribution. Subsurface events don't remain contained. The crust isn't protective shell miss, it's dynamic membrane. This perspective doesn't require mystical thinking. It demands systems understanding, recognition that apparent separation often masks connection, that gradual processes retain significance. That change needn't be visible to be genuine. Within this framework, plate tectonics becomes Earth's regulatory component mechanisms, both recording history and staging future developments. Past collision scars persist. Ancient rift zone traces remain. Vanished ocean remnants endure. Buried continental edges lost to time survive. The planet retains memory mind not verbally, but positionally. Not through thought, but through form. That memory isn't passive. It influences future developments. It determines next mountain emergence, next earthquake release, next sea opening. As we dream symbolically, Earth may dream through pressure and fracturing, through elevation and descent, through gradual heat and stone movement, a form of extended geological imagination continuously reshaping itself. Like any dream, meaning may not clarify until later. We inhabit the edge of something enormous, a crust that moves, exhales heat, silently reforms itself. If Earth could communicate, what would it express? Not metaphorically, not mythologically, but genuinely. If all these systems, oceanic, forest, soil, atmospheric, tectonic, constantly interact, measure, respond, and remember, then the planet already expresses itself. Not vocally, but consequentially, not linguistically, but through signals. Speaking typically means structured communication, sounds organized into interpretable patterns. Yet as we've observed in forest warning networks through roots and fungi, in microbial chemical messaging, in cloud formation, responding to particles, Earth already transmits messages. The challenge isn't whether Earth communicates, it's whether we're listening appropriately. Consider temperature, rising averages, extending heat waves growing more frequent and lethal. So these aren't isolated incidents. They're communicative forms, feedback from systems absorbing more energy than they can reflect. Melting glaciers, rising sea levels, prolonging droughts. Each represents dialogue lines we've ignored too extensively. When we eliminate forests, water cycles transform, reduced transpiration, decreased rainfall, desiccated soil, Earth responds. Crops fail, waterways shrink, fire seasons extend. It doesn't issue alerts, it simply shifts. It delivers consequences. When atmospheric carbon thickens, it retains additional heat, weakening jet streams. Weather systems stagnate. Precipitation falls incorrectly or suddenly. Earth adjusts, not from intention, but necessity. It rebalances using available tools, energy, mass, motion. You could classify these responses as mechanical, chemical, physical, inevitable. Yet if they consistently match actions with reactions, if they return information to origin points, they function communicatively. The message indicates change has occurred. The tone suggests adaptation. If Earth could communicate comprehensibly, it wouldn't resemble us. It wouldn't construct sentences or announce intentions. It would map atmospheric pressure gradients. It would modify monsoon timing. It would elevate sea temperatures sufficiently to bleach coral reefs and collapse fisheries. Essentially, it already accomplishes this. We simply haven't acknowledged it as communication. Because recognizing planetary communication requires deciding response methods. When volcanic eruptions inject stratospheric aerosols, cooling the planet for years, not as retribution but physics. When ice melts, it darkens surfaces absorbing increased heat. That's feedback, loops, sentences with subjects and effects. When complete ecosystems begin deteriorating, Earth communicates again through extinctions, migrations, trophic cascades. Wolf disappearance alters rivers. Insect disappearance affects birds. It's not symbolic, it's structural, meaning through interconnection. We often expect messages with warning indicators, flashing lights, raised voices, yet many of Earth's clearest communications arrive quietly. Oceanic pH shifts, missing phytoplankton blooms, transformed forest soundscapes once filled with insects and amphibians. We hear less, notice less. Messages continue transmission. Some scientists term these tipping points, not because Earth tips, but because once exceeded, systems enter different states, like fevers or thresholds. Communication becomes harder ignoring. Symptoms proliferate. What's remarkable is Earth's message consistency. Rising CO2 correlates with warming. Deforestation correlates with declining precipitation. Right now, as you're watching this, something massive is screaming at us. But we're not listening. It's not using words or sending texts. It's speaking through the collapse of entire ecosystems, through the disappearance of species, through patterns so obvious that ignoring them feels almost criminal. Overfishing doesn't whisper warnings before it destroys ocean life completely. It just happens, following the same devastating blueprint we've seen countless times before. These patterns aren't random chaos. They're conversations we've been having with our planet for decades, and we've been too distracted to notice we're part of the discussion. Every time we measure environmental change, we focus on the numbers, the data, the statistics, but we're asking the wrong questions entirely. What if we stopped trying to prove whether Earth is alive and started asking what it's desperately trying to balance? What if we stopped pretending we're just observers and acknowledged that we've been active participants in this planetary dialogue from the very beginning? Our planet communicates through interconnected systems, and humans have become one of its most influential voices. Every city we build, every crop we plant, every factory we operate becomes part of this massive planetary feedback loop. What we pump into the atmosphere, what we strip from the land, what we alter in the oceans all gets processed and responded to by the same global system. The planet doesn't respond with emotions or anger. It responds with consequences. You don't need faith or beliefs to understand this. You just need to pay attention. When a human body shows fever, inflammation, exhaustion, or chemical imbalances, doctors recognize these as symptoms pointing to underlying problems. The biosphere works exactly the same way. But here's what gives me hope. These signals also mean we have the power to change the conversation entirely. We can shift the messages we're sending. We can participate in healing instead of harm. When forests recover, temperatures stabilize naturally. When emissions decrease, air quality improves dramatically. When biodiversity rebounds, entire ecosystems become more resilient. Earth responds to positive changes just as clearly as negative ones. Not instantly, but consistently over time. It adapts, integrates, and adjusts. Not because it's merciful or forgiving, but because that's simply how healthy systems function when they still have room to flex and adapt. But that flexibility isn't infinite. Part of being a good listener means recognizing when staying quiet is no longer possible. If our planet could ask us directly, it might say something like this: "Are you finally hearing what I've been telling you?" But ice doesn't just disappear quietly. It completely transforms the geography of our planet. When massive ice sheets melt and that water spreads across the globe, something incredible happens beneath our feet. The ground itself starts rising, slowly rebounding after being compressed under billions of tons of ice for millennia. This isn't just local change, it's planetary restructuring happening right now. Ocean currents that have flowed in predictable patterns for thousands of years suddenly shift direction when fresh meltwater disrupts their delicate balance. The Gulf Stream, which keeps Europe warm, begins weakening. Ancient monsoon patterns that entire civilizations have depended on start changing course. Rain that used to fall reliably in one region now dumps unexpectedly somewhere else entirely. The planet is literally responding to its own changes. Ice serves as one of Earth's most critical feedback mechanisms, one of its clearest ways of showing us what's happening. Not intentionally, but inevitably, it has no choice but to react. Some people still claim climate change is too invisible, too gradual, too theoretical to worry about. But anyone paying attention to ice knows that's completely wrong. The evidence is becoming more visible every day. The abstract is becoming concrete. The timelines are accelerating dramatically. Yet ice never shouts for attention. It doesn't beg or demand. It simply moves, vanishes, or destabilizes glaciers that have stood firm for centuries. That's how it communicates, and its message remains consistent. Fundamental conditions have shifted. If Earth possesses any form of awareness, ice might function as its long-term memory storage, slow to change, but impossible to dismiss once it starts moving. Like being jolted awake from a dream too early, like discovering a balance that's no longer balanced. If we're truly listening, we might understand what comes next, not through mystical prophecy, but through scientific projection, not through panic, but through recognizing patterns. Ice reveals what Earth is trying to restore and shows us how far we've drifted from that stability. Each melting season, each vanishing glacier tells us exactly how the system is adapting to the signals we've been sending. Perhaps the most honest response we can offer is to actually answer back. This forces us to ask a deeper, more personal question, not about Earth systems or environmental signals, but about ourselves. What does it mean to exist within these massive, responsive networks while still struggling to truly feel them, understand them, or respond appropriately? There's a straightforward explanation for this disconnect, and it goes much deeper than politics, education, or even awareness. It's the fundamental challenge of being human. The issue isn't that people don't care, most genuinely do. The real problem is that we're designed biologically, neurologically and socially, to focus on completely different things, or at least things that helped our ancestors survive in smaller, simpler environments, not global systems, not changes spanning centuries, not invisible feedback loops operating across continents. We evolved to respond to immediate threats, personal dangers, and obvious signals. This made perfect sense, given our origins. Throughout most of human history, survival meant reading other people's facial expressions, noticing shifts in local weather patterns, and understanding how familiar landscapes changed with seasons. We lived in communities small enough to actually know everyone. We hunted animals we could see with our eyes. We grew food in soil we could touch with our hands. When problems arose, we usually knew exactly why. Those ancient instincts haven't disappeared. We're still built for short distances, narrow focus, and quick decisions, not because we're intellectually limited, but because our minds were perfectly optimized for a world where that approach was sufficient. Now our influence has expanded far beyond our intuition. We're altering systems we cannot see, accelerating patterns that unfold across generations, while trying to process everything with brains designed for campfires and small tribes. When the planet sends feedback through rising seas, retreating ice, and disappearing insects, we can understand it intellectually, but not emotionally. We know it's happening, even believe it's urgent, yet still find ourselves struggling to respond with the intensity the situation demands. Because the threat isn't a predator charging toward us, it's billions of tons of invisible carbon floating in the atmosphere. We also have the storytelling problem. Humans make sense of everything through narratives. We search for clear causes, identifiable characters, satisfying resolutions, obvious beginnings and endings, heroes and villains. This works brilliantly for understanding events with clear storylines. But anime ecosystems don't follow dramatic structure. They operate in loops, not straight lines. There's no climactic moment, no final resolution, just constant balance and imbalance, endless feedback and flow. When Earth responds in ways that feel ambiguous, we instinctively try forcing it into familiar frameworks. Is it angry with us? Is it punishing humanity? Is it slowly dying? We ask these questions because we're human, and humans relate through emotions. But Earth doesn't experience emotions the way we do. This makes its responses incredibly easy to misinterpret. We also struggle tremendously with scale. We notice what's directly in front of us. We prioritize what affects us personally. A flood in our own neighborhood feels devastatingly real. A drought on another continent feels much less urgent. Even when these systems are connected, even when our actions contributed to both disasters, the emotional distance remains. Scientists call this the empathy gap. It's not cruelty or selfishness, it's simply human capacity. We're not designed to hold the entire world's suffering in our minds simultaneously. Then there's the time problem. Planets move slowly. Modern culture moves incredibly fast. A single tree's lifespan covers centuries. A human career lasts maybe a few decades. Decisions about emissions today might matter most a century from now, far beyond most people's planning horizons. Our lives are brief, our deadlines feel urgent, and Earth doesn't operate on our schedules. This mismatch creates constant tension. We want to help, but we want visible results. We want to take action, but we want proof that our actions matter. When feedback gets delayed or remains indirect, motivation naturally fades. We start feeling like the system is too vast, too slow, or too damaged to even hear our individual voices. Add the systems we've constructed around ourselves. Economic structures that reward extraction over preservation. Infrastructure designed for speed rather than sustainability. Technologies that spread information faster than genuine understanding develops. Individual people aren't failing. We were simply never taught how to function as individuals within a planetary system. This is the painful truth. Being human during ecological collapse hurts because we can see what's happening clearly. We can identify the damage precisely, but we're not neurologically equipped to carry all that weight simultaneously. Yet we keep trying anyway. We mourn species we've never encountered. We study data we'll never use directly. We advocate for people we'll never meet personally. In doing so, we stretch beyond our biological limitations. We expand what caring actually means. We adapt, not through evolution, but through conscious ethical choice. This might represent the most extraordinary aspect of human nature. We can feel genuine responsibility for things far beyond our immediate social circle. We can make decisions for people who haven't been born yet. We can envision futures we'll never experience ourselves. Sometimes that vision actually transforms into real action. But imagining beyond our own lifespans isn't simple, especially when everything around us is built for immediate gratification. News cycles refresh every 24 hours. Climate science gets buried beneath endless distractions. Fully Earth's responses reach us filtered through charts and predictions rather than direct, visceral experience. This captures the real challenge of human existence. We are trapped between the scale we can actually feel and the scale we're actively affecting. We notice the pleasant warmth of a sunny afternoon, but we can't sense the jet stream shifting overhead. We witness individual storms, but miss the global weather patterns driving them. We enjoy momentary comfort while remaining blind to the systemic costs that created it. None of this renders us powerless. If anything, it reveals exactly why we need completely new forms of awareness, not to eliminate our natural instincts, but to expand them dramatically. Understanding that caring for a system doesn't mean feeling every component of it, but it absolutely requires acknowledging that system exists. Earth doesn't demand that we feel everything simultaneously. It asks us to notice feedback, respond to signals, and remember that being human doesn't mean standing separate from everything else. It means participating in a system we can only partially perceive, but still profoundly influence. We'll never become flawless systems thinkers. We'll continue missing details, forgetting connections, and prioritizing immediate concerns, but we can learn continuously, teach others effectively, and organize collectively. Those activities, sustained over time, can actually shift entire patterns. Because being human is challenging, but it also grants us the remarkable ability to redefine what being human means. Now we need to look beyond ourselves again, not just at the systems we impact, but at the minds we consistently ignore, the minds that aren't human, the ones that don't communicate through words or display expressions we immediately recognize. Once we begin questioning what consciousness might look like on a planetary scale, we're forced to examine what qualifies as a mind at all. This reveals how incredibly narrow our assumptions have always been. For centuries, humans believed we were the only conscious species on Earth. We possessed language, memory, creativity. We created art, used tools, told stories. Everything else was just instinct or programming. But this belief has crumbled slowly and steadily as scientific observation has documented countless animal behaviors that completely shatter our old script. Crows solve complex, multi-step puzzles that would challenge many humans. Octopuses navigate intricate mazes and escape from supposedly secure containers. Whales develop distinct regional dialects within their species. Parrots actually invent new words and use them contextually. Dolphins recognize their own reflections in mirrors, demonstrating self-awareness. Ants coordinate traffic flow better than most city planners. Bees communicate precise flower locations through sophisticated dance movements. The more researchers investigate, the more intelligence appears in places we never thought to look. The deeper realization hits hard. Intelligence doesn't have just one form. It doesn't require a brain structured like ours, or a body resembling ours. It doesn't even need a central nervous system. Intelligence emerges through networks, responses, and adaptation patterns. It appears wherever systems can sense their environment, make decisions, and take action, often without anything we'd recognize as conscious thought. Take plants, for example. They don't possess neurons, yet they detect light, moisture, temperature, and gravity with remarkable precision. They grow toward beneficial conditions and away from harmful ones. They send chemical warning signals to other plants when threatened. Their root systems actively seek nutrients while avoiding toxins. They even appear to recognize relatives, modifying their growth patterns accordingly. If that's not thinking in some form, it's something remarkably parallel, some kind of awareness distributed throughout their entire structure. Fungi operate through vast underground networks. The mycelium beneath forests can span entire landscapes, sharing nutrients, redirecting resources, and connecting trees from completely different species. These networks remember chemical signatures, respond to changes in moisture and pressure, and demonstrate what looks suspiciously like decision-making. Scientists have recorded electrical pulses traveling through fungal networks, with frequencies that change when exposed to different stimuli. We don't understand what those pulses represent yet, but the structure resembles a massive, ongoing conversation. These discoveries completely challenge our mental frameworks. We've always seen thinking as something brains do, especially mammalian brains. But what if cognitive ability can emerge in any sufficiently complex, responsive system? What if mind isn't a thing at all, but rather a process? Some philosophers and scientists are exploring this through concepts like embodied cognition and extended mind theory. These suggest that thinking doesn't happen only inside our skulls. It occurs through our bodies, through our environment, through constant interaction with everything around us. When you use a notebook to remember information, when you reach for a familiar tool, when your hands guide your thinking process, that's cognition extending beyond your brain. It's a small conceptual leap from there to consider that other systems like forests, coral reefs, or even weather patterns might also contain the fundamental components of cognition. Not thoughts as we experience them, not emotions as we feel them, but the capacity to integrate information, respond to context, and modify future behavior based on past experience. From this perspective, the boundary between mind and system starts dissolving. Human brains are systems, forests are systems, cities are systems. Each responds to inputs, develops structure, maintains itself, repairs damage, and grows over time. We don't typically call cities conscious, but they remember where people travel. They adapt to changing needs. They develop patterns, rhythms, and capabilities. No single component contains the complete picture. Intelligence emerges from countless parts interacting, none of which understands the whole system independently. This is what emergence means. Intelligence or functionality arising from simpler elements combining in complex ways. Individual neurons can't think. Networks of billions of neurons can. Maybe individual trees don't know anything. But forests behaving as networks demonstrate something that resembles awareness of environmental change. If this idea feels disturbing, it's worth examining why. Perhaps because we've grown comfortable thinking of humans as central to everything, or because we're afraid of losing our sense of uniqueness, or because we don't know how to relate to minds we can't easily recognize. But if we're going to survive on a planet filled with responsive systems, ones we depend on and constantly influence, it matters tremendously that we understand them as more than mere background scenery, not just environment, not just resources, but systems with memory, communication abilities, flexibility, and possibly, in some sense, awareness. This doesn't mean attributing consciousness everywhere, indiscriminately. It means recognizing that human consciousness is just one version among many, and not necessarily the most effective one for managing planetary-scale systems. A distributed mind might not think in words or images. It might operate through pulses, feedback loops, and dynamic balance. It might not separate itself from everything else around it. It might not set specific goals or maintain awareness of its own awareness. Yet, it could still preserve internal consistency, still adapt to changes, still continue evolving in response to new conditions. When you examine Earth from this perspective, as an interconnected network of living, sensing, adapting systems, the central question shifts dramatically. Instead of asking, is it conscious? We start wondering, how do we connect with its different ways of understanding? Because there absolutely is understanding embedded in migration patterns that span continents, in the precise timing of flowering and pollination cycles, in the shifting of massive ocean currents, in the rise and extinction of entire species over millennia. There's understanding in how coral organisms construct complex reef systems, in how moss gradually colonizes bare stone, in how ice preserves atmospheric records spanning hundreds of thousands of years. This isn't romantic fantasy. This is pure function, survival strategies encoded directly into behavior patterns, life constantly shaping and reshaping itself in response to changing conditions. If we can start comprehending that type of intelligence, decentralized and non-verbal and pattern-based, it fundamentally transforms how we listen to our environment. It changes what we accept as valid evidence, and it might completely change how we choose to act. Because currently, Almost all our major decisions operate on the assumption that only one type of mind matters, the human one. But minds are tools for processing information and making decisions, and this planet already possesses incredibly sophisticated tools, systems that maintained stability for millions of years before humans even existed, systems we're now pushing far beyond their natural limits. To live successfully on this planet long term, we might need more than just intelligence. We might need genuine humility, the capacity to acknowledge that we're surrounded by minds we didn't create, we don't fully comprehend, and we absolutely cannot replace if they collapse. Maybe that recognition represents its own form of awakening, not for Earth, but for us. Building on this idea that intelligence and awareness might not belong exclusively to human minds or even to brains at all, we arrive at a completely different type of question, one that doesn't ask what Earth thinks or how it communicates, but what it actually is at the most fundamental level. Not chemically or geologically or biologically, but essentially, if something resembling consciousness does operate across interconnected systems, if mind-like processes are distributed through root networks, ocean currents, storm patterns, and ice formations, then we can ask seriously, without irony or metaphor, does Earth possess something like a soul? And if it does, what would that soul be made of? The word soul carries enormous baggage, is centuries of religious doctrine, philosophical debates, and emotional complexity. But underneath all that cultural weight, it often points to something surprisingly simple, the essence of a thing, what brings it to life, what makes it more than just a collection of separate parts. In humans, we associate soul with individual identity, the part of us that persists through constant change, the part that searches, suffers, and reflects on its own existence. It's not something we can measure scientifically, but something we sense intuitively. When it's missing, we immediately notice a place, a gesture, a life without soul feels hollow and disconnected. So what happens when you apply this concept to an entire planet? Initially, it might seem ridiculous. How could something made of rock, ocean, and atmosphere possess anything resembling a soul? But maybe the answer lies right there in those materials themselves. Stone and water aren't just symbols or metaphors. They're active systems that hold memory, energy, and constant motion. Stone forms gradually under intense heat and pressure. It preserves records of deep time, layers of ancient sediment, folds created by massive collisions, veins of prehistoric magma. A mountain range isn't merely a geographic shape. It's a sequence of geological events stretching back millions of years. It holds memories of uplift and erosion, of once being ocean floor or molten lava or vast plains. Water, more than anything else, never stops moving. It evaporates into clouds, condenses into rain, falls to earth, freezes into ice, flows through rivers and streams. It never truly disappears. It just transforms states, travels immense distances, carries information across landscapes. Water dissolves minerals, transports essential nutrients, stores and releases heat, reflects sky and light. It cycles endlessly through plants, animals, clouds, soil, and glaciers. It connects absolutely everything that exists. Every living thing that has ever existed has depended completely on water. If something like a soul exists on this planet, it might exist precisely in that dynamic tension between permanence and motion, between what remains stable and what constantly changes. Stone provides the foundation, the grounding structure. Water creates the circulation, the flow. Together they shape everything else that emerges. Earth doesn't possess a single center of consciousness like we do. It doesn't engage in self-reflection the way humans do, but it does maintain profound coherence across all its systems. Storms don't develop in complete isolation. Forests don't thrive independently. Rivers don't follow random paths through landscapes. Everything connects. Everything adjusts to everything else. Just living continuity, emerging from what appears to be inert matter. When people talk about the spirit of a place, they're usually pointing towards something similar, not a literal ghost or supernatural presence, but a tangible feeling of something being present. A canyon carved by wind over millennia, a coastline sculpted by endless tides, a grove of trees that has witnessed centuries of change. The sense that the land has experienced more than we have, that it carries its own form of awareness, even when we can't explain it rationally. People often feel this without needing to believe anything mystical. The profound silence of desert landscapes, the weight of being deep inside a cave, the way certain rocks retain warmth long after sunset, the unmistakable feeling of being observed by a forest that never actually moves. These experiences don't require belief in magic or supernatural forces. They require attention and openness. Maybe the concept of soul isn't about proving something exists. Maybe it's about recognizing something we've forgotten how to acknowledge or name properly. Because if soul is what connects different parts into a whole, what preserves memory across time, what persists through constant change, then Earth has possessed one for an incredibly long time. We just built civilizations that stopped listening to it. We created economic systems that reduced it to scenery, property, background resources for human use. But you cannot extract a soul without facing serious consequences. You cannot mine away memory, dam natural motion, clear-cut the communication networks of entire ecosystems, and expect everything to remain intact and functional. When we take from natural systems without giving back, we break the feedback loops. The planet responds accordingly, not with conscious punishment, but with inevitable imbalance. When forests disappear, rainfall decreases in those regions. When wetlands vanish, flooding increases downstream. When biodiversity collapses, ecosystem resilience plummets. The entire system becomes more fragile and brittle. The feedback loops contract. The range of possible responses narrows dramatically. This isn't merely symbolic or poetic. It's completely measurable through scientific observation. But it feels symbolic because it touches something much deeper than simple cause and effect relationships. It reminds us that we're part of something far older than human civilization, something that doesn't need us to exist, but does include us in its vast processes. A soul made of stone and water wouldn't resemble ours at all. It wouldn't store memories and language or carefully weigh decisions like humans do, but it would still embody the fundamental relationships between gravity and motion, between heat and flow, between growth and decay, between stability and change. This is what we're part of. This is what we're affecting, and this is what we need to learn to listen to if we want to continue being part of it. You witness it everywhere once you start looking. Rivers slowly carving grand canyons through solid rock, moss gradually reclaiming abandoned concrete walls, the relentless way ocean waves wear down the most stubborn cliffs, the stunning return of vibrant green life after devastating forest fires. Earth's soul isn't located in any single place you could visit or point to on a map. It exists in the pattern of renewal itself, the endless cycle of breakdown and regeneration that defines our planet. Our ancestors understood this instinctively. They created stories that honored these patterns, not to replace scientific understanding, but to maintain connection with something vastly larger than individual human experience. The breathing of landscapes, the changing moods of oceans, the voices people heard in wind, these weren't primitive superstitions. They were ways of remembering a crucial truth. We don't simply live on Earth's surface. We live embedded within Earth's systems. When we forget this fundamental relationship, we risk transforming into a force that only extracts value instead of participating meaningfully. We accelerate processes instead of harmonizing with them. We become disruptive noise instead of constructive signals within the planetary conversation. But this outcome isn't inevitable at all. We can still completely change the role we choose to play in Earth systems. We can deliberately slow down our pace and listen more carefully to what's actually happening around us. We can reconnect with natural cycles and patterns. We can design human systems that mirror nature's feedback loops instead of constantly overriding them. We can develop technologies that actively support ecological restoration, not just industrial production. We can start treating Earth not as a mechanical resource to exploit, but as a system with genuine presence. Maybe not conscious in the way humans are conscious, but definitely not silent and absolutely not indifferent to what happens within it. Understanding soul in this context isn't making claims about supernatural spirits. It's recognizing depth, interconnectedness, and life built on matter, shaped by motion, and sustained through dynamic balance. If that's accurate, then Earth's soul isn't something you search for somewhere else. It's something you discover you're already living inside of. This brings us to a question that's both deeply personal and fundamentally structural. What keeps us examining all of this complexity with genuine care? What cuts through endless data, system analysis, and scientific studies to make us feel something authentically real? The answer might be simpler than we imagine. It's wonder. The deeper you dive into Earth systems, the more you realize that wonder isn't the opposite of rigorous science. It's exactly why science exists in the first place. We've been trained to separate emotional responses from analytical thinking. Facts belong in one category, feelings in another. But this artificial division never actually made sense. Nearly every major scientific breakthrough in history began with profound awe, not with absolute certainty, but with puzzling confusion, with burning curiosity, with someone noticing something completely unexpected and refusing to look away from it. What creates that mysterious light in the sky? Why do all trees grow towards sunlight? How does lightning actually split through air? Wonder happens when reality breaks through your existing assumptions about how things work. It interrupts normal routine. It creates space for something you never anticipated encountering. In that moment of surprise and pause, the deep need to understand something truly begins. This matters enormously because we're living through a time when most people already know the basic facts. Climate change is accelerating. Biodiversity is collapsing rapidly. Natural systems are unraveling across the globe. But knowing facts alone doesn't automatically generate action. Raw data isn't sufficient to motivate real change. What actually moves people, what captures their sustained attention, what opens them up to possibilities for transformation is often something completely different. It's the profound feeling that our world is far more complex, more genuinely alive, and more absolutely worth saving than anyone ever told them. That transformative feeling is wonder, and earth science overflows with it. Start with something small and immediate. A single tiny seed somehow knows which direction is down before it even begins growing. It orients itself perfectly using gravity. Scientists call this gravitropism. Sunflowers track the sun's arc across the sky, rotating throughout entire days. The trees share resources and communicate warnings through vast underground fungal networks. Coral animals construct massive reef structures from dissolved minerals in seawater. Hummingbirds can remember precise locations and blooming schedules of hundreds of different flowers. Bats use echolocation to create detailed mental maps of three-dimensional airspaces. Moss absorbs dangerous radiation in abandoned cities, slowly cleaning contaminated environments. Microscopic tardigrades can survive the vacuum of outer space. None of these facts are recent discoveries, but when you sit with them quietly, not just as interesting trivia, but as genuine revelations about reality, something fundamental shifts in your perspective. You begin noticing how much incredible activity is happening constantly, just beyond your usual frame of reference. The more you learn, the wider that frame expands. Scientists studying climate feedback loops, ice sheet dynamics, and carbon cycles are also people who wake up before dawn to witness sunrise over ancient glaciers. They spend years carefully tagging whales, tracking soil microorganisms, and measuring volcanic gas emissions, because they understand that inside those precise measurements lies a story worth sharing, a system worth comprehending, and a planet absolutely worth protecting. They don't pursue this work because they've abandoned wonder. They do it because they've never lost it. This perspective becomes critically important right now. We're constantly surrounded by narratives focused on collapse and destruction. Those narratives, even when factually accurate, can generate emotional fatigue, psychological numbness, and the devastating sense that positive change is already impossible. One of the few things that consistently breaks through that despair is wonder, not naive optimism that ignores problems, not escapist distraction from reality, but the powerful reminder that our world remains absolutely full of meaning and beauty. A spider's web catching morning dew and transforming it into liquid diamonds. A leaf pattern that perfectly mirrors the spiral structure of distant galaxies. A cave system that literally breathes air in and out with changing atmospheric pressure. A stone that formed under unimaginable pressure millions of years before mammals even existed. The breath you just took, made possible by countless algae organisms and trees, converting sunlight into oxygen, carried to your lungs by air currents moving across vast oceans. Every single one of these phenomena is completely explainable through scientific understanding. But scientific explanation doesn't make them any less absolutely astonishing. Science doesn't eliminate wonder. It adds infinite layers to it. It reveals how profoundly connected everything really is, how a volcanic eruption on one continent can dramatically alter crop yields on another continent thousands of miles away, how ancient climate events remain perfectly preserved in lake sediment layers, how whale songs travel hundreds of kilometers through ocean water, bouncing between different temperature layers like biological sonar systems. The more deeply you understand these patterns, the more wonder transforms into a form of intelligence itself. Not a soft, sentimental feeling, but a sharp, precise one. A way of perceiving reality that cuts through distracting noise and pulls your attention toward what genuinely matters. Because wonder doesn't mean being naive about problems. It means being truly awake to possibilities. The real challenge is that modern life isn't designed to support this kind of sustained attention. We move frantically fast. We scroll past everything. We filter all experiences through artificial urgency or shallow entertainment. In doing so, we dramatically shrink the mental space where wonder can actually live and grow. But wonder doesn't require enormous amounts of room or time. Sometimes it needs just a single question. Sometimes just a brief moment of genuine curiosity. Why does that particular bird migrate such incredible distances? How does that stone maintain its brilliant color after centuries of weather? What geological forces shaped that valley over millions of years? Why is tonight's tide higher than usual? Every one of these simple questions opens a thread of investigation that leads directly back to complex systems. Feedback loops, geological timescales, evolutionary strategies, and atmospheric chemistry. Every thread ultimately ends in the same profound realization. This planet is not random chaos. It's not silent background. It's not indifferent to what happens within its systems. It's constantly active, intricately interconnected, and if you're genuinely paying attention, always communicating something meaningful. This doesn't mean we need to maintain constant amazement about everything. That's psychologically impossible and emotionally exhausting. But it does mean we can intentionally build practices that keep the door to wonder consistently open. Learning at least one completely new thing every day, paying careful attention to one small part of Earth's system, spending real time outdoors without digital distractions, asking questions even when we don't immediately need practical answers, choosing deliberately to feel genuine connection with the living world around us. Because that feeling isn't just personally pleasant, it's absolutely essential for planetary survival. When people experience genuine wonder, they instinctively want to protect whatever created that feeling. When they lose that emotional connection entirely, they tend to forget why protection matters in the first place. Wonder isn't luxury, it's necessity. It's what keeps us caring, it's what keeps us fighting, it's what keeps us human in the best possible sense. The science of wonder isn't about believing in magic or supernatural forces, it's about discovering genuine meaning in reality itself. Is about fulfilling the fundamental human need to feel genuinely connected to something infinitely larger than ourselves. Not to control or dominate that larger system, but to truly belong within it. When that sense of belonging becomes authentic and real, it naturally leads to deep care and protection. This is precisely where rigorous science and spiritual connection unite, not as opposing forces, but as powerful allies working toward the same goal. The scientific tools that explain how our planet functions don't diminish its incredible value. They reveal just how valuable it truly is. The more we understand Earth's intricate systems, the more we remember that we exist inside them, shaped by them, completely dependent on them, and ultimately responsible to them. Wonder constantly reminds us that Earth isn't just background scenery for human activities. It's an active participant in everything that happens. We're not merely users of its systems from the outside, we are integral parts of the pattern itself. Building from this science of wonder, the driving force that compels us to observe, understand, and genuinely care about our world, we return finally to something beautifully simple. Not to the vast scale of global ecosystems, or the ancient age of glaciers or the slow dreams of shifting tectonic plates, but to this exact moment you're experiencing right now, this precise place where you currently exist. Because everything we've explored together, every feedback loop, every planetary signal, every question about consciousness or balance or soul, all of it ultimately lands right here, not somewhere distant and abstract, but here in the air, immediately surrounding you, in the ground directly beneath you, in the body you're living inside of at this very moment. Look up from wherever you are right now. Notice the ceiling above you, or the open sky, or the leaves hanging overhead. Whether it's completely quiet, gently moving, or completely dark, that space around you is filled with oxygen and nitrogen and carbon dioxide. These are the exact same gases that plants have been creating for you across millions of years of evolution. The same air molecules have traveled through ancient forests, countless animals, vast oceans, and modern factories. This is air with memory embedded in it, air with deep history flowing through it. It didn't begin its journey here, and it won't end here, but it's sharing this moment with you right now. Look around at your immediate environment, the materials, surfaces, and structures surrounding you, the plastic on your desk, the metal components in your phone, the wood forming your chair. Everything you see was originally grown, extracted, or shaped by planetary processes over enormous spans of time. The sand transformed into clear glass, ancient oil converted into synthetic fibers, living trees converted into useful furniture. Every single object carries within it a story from Earth's crust, from the distant past, from the stored energy of prehistoric sunlight. Listen carefully to your environment. Maybe it's completely quiet where you are. Maybe you hear birds singing, machines humming, human voices, or nothing at all. Even silence itself is shaped by your specific location, by air pressure and temperature, by insulation and soundscapes that developed over time. There are frequencies filling the space around you that your ears cannot detect. Electromagnetic waves, molecular motion, subsonic pulses from infrastructure, even subtle vibrations from the planet's crust itself. Touch something near you, the floor, the wall, your own hand. You're feeling a surface that exists because atoms naturally repel each other, because matter resists collapse. The texture, warmth, and pressure you feel are all mediated by electromagnetic fields, by bonds between countless molecules, by physics operating simultaneously on every part of Earth. Take a conscious breath right now. That air has traveled incredible distances. It has moved through rainforests and car engines, through other people's lungs, through factories and deserts and ocean waves. The molecules you just pulled into your body may have been exhaled by another person hours ago, or by a tree or an animal or a tide pool or even a volcano. Each breath is simultaneously ancient and completely recent. This isn't abstract philosophy or poetic metaphor. This is literal structure and reality. You exist inside a system made of countless interconnected systems. Even the most ordinary moment of your life is layered with profound connections spanning the entire planet. What you call your body isn't separate from Earth at all. It's constructed from calcium, water, carbon, and iron extracted from planetary systems. It was built by DNA that carries genetic codes developed over billions of years of evolution. You are a living geological archive, a walking and thinking expression of Earth's chemistry in action. Your thoughts emerge from neurons firing in patterns that evolved to navigate light, distance, danger, and care. You are literally part of the biosphere examining itself. That's not poetic language or spiritual metaphor. That's the most grounded scientific truth we possess. So when we discuss Earth as a conscious system, as a living entity, as a network of feedbacks and memory, we're not talking about something distant and separate from you. We're talking about exactly where you are right now. Your body is regulating temperature just like the planet regulates climate. Right now, your senses are responding to environmental stimuli just like a forest responds, or a mycelial network responds, or a river basin responds to rainfall. Right now, at this very moment, you are participating in the same feedback loops that move air masses, shift climate patterns, grow food, and carry water across continents. You're not standing outside the system trying to fix it from a distance. You are the system attempting to rebalance itself. This represents a powerful shift in perspective because it moves responsibility from something abstract and overwhelming to something embodied and immediate. It means the work of ecological repair isn't just about carbon credits or policy changes happening somewhere else. It's also about attention, daily practice, active participation, and remembering where you actually are. Because where you are absolutely matters. Your local weather patterns are part of the global jet stream. Your street is part of a watershed that connects to rivers and oceans. Your daily habits create ripple effects through supply chains, energy grids, waste systems, and cultural influence. Even your language shapes how other people think about nature, connection, and value. When you start to genuinely feel that reality, not just understand it intellectually, but feel it in your body and heart, you don't need permission to take action. You don't need absolute certainty about outcomes. You don't need to have everything figured out perfectly. You just need to start from exactly where you are right now. Because where you are is already overflowing with signals, brimming with possibility, filled with systems that desperately need listening and care. Look out the nearest window, touch the ground with your hand. Think about the last meal you ate, the last breath you took, the last moment you felt genuinely connected to something larger than yourself. None of those experiences are separate from Earth systems. None of them happened by accident, and none of them are too small to matter in the larger pattern. You are not apart from this planet. You're not a mistake it made or a problem it has to solve. You are one of the ways Earth thinks, responds, and continues evolving. So start there. Start from where you are right now. Not as a visitor passing through, not as a savior coming to rescue something, but as an integral part of something ongoing and alive. Something still capable of finding balance. Something that may already be listening, waiting, and adjusting itself right now.